everyone.
Morning.
Welcome to Behance Portfolio Review Live. We're your hosts, Rossin, Roxanne, Schwartz.
Hey everyone.
We're from the Behance community team. Behance is the leading online creative network, and we're part of the Adobe family. Right now, we've got millions of members across the world tuning in, and we're going to get started soon.
So in the past, the Behance community has hosted thousands of portfolio reviews across the globe. This broadcast actually marks the first live stream we're doing, so it's really exciting. We're so happy to have you here in the audience. If you actually are interested in going to an in-person event near a city near you, you can head over to behance.net/reviews. This will be happening all week through Saturday. For our purposes today, we're going to be welcoming 4 different reviewers from 4 different creative fields who are leaders in their industry, who will be actually reviewing portfolios that have been sourced from our community. So if you're watching on YouTube, please head over to behance.net/live, where you'll be able to participate in our chat. You can give your feedback as we're going along, share your work. And if you are on Twitter, please chime in with the hashtag Behance Live.
Cool, and with that, we'll get into our first category, graphic design, and welcome our first reviewer. Brooks is a graphic designer by trade and is currently the brand director for Behance and 99U at Adobe. Last year, he led a complete redesign of the 99U quarterly magazine, website, conference materials, sort of anything that you'd see for 99U. And we want to welcome Mark. Thanks for joining us today.
Thank you for having me.
Hey, Mark.
Glad to be here. Hi,
It's good to see you.
Yeah.
So before we jump in and kind of get started with portfolio, I just want to ask a couple questions. So in the world of graphic design, what kind of designer are you?
It's hard to define what kind of designer I am, but I can kind of tell you the different stages I've been through, which kind of led to what I do today. I started by focusing a lot on music-related projects or anything that had to do with art or culture. And then along with that, I did a lot of like small branding projects with lots of logos and these kind of things. And then the branding thing started to take off and get bigger and bigger. So almost like accidentally, I ended up becoming, a designer who focused a lot on branding. And then from there, I moved to Behance, where it's a lot of branding. and then in Behance, I also explored a new discipline, which is the editorial field, editorial design, which I hadn't really done in the past. It was a lot of like, single items, pieces, and the editorial world is like, it was a brand new thing to me, especially with 99U, the magazine. It's been an incredible experience, and it's getting better every time. So
a lot of work goes into it every time.
A lot of work, and it's one of the great things about this job, because you can actually tackle new things that you've never tried before, and it's not that look and check it, but it's definitely something you can add to your experience and then move on to the next thing. So it's not hard to challenge yourself.
Cool.
With design. Yeah.
So you mentioned you did a lot of brand work before Behance. Like, what are some brands or things that people out there might know you from, or maybe seen your work before?
Actually, I don't think I've ever done like, huge famous brands or anything. I've always liked to be like a small designer taking on small projects for small clients, because I feel like I have more control over the project.
Right.
I have like a closer relationship with the customer, and it's easier to really get involved in the process and everything.
Right.
And so. But I have worked for larger brands where I got to see a little bit, the importance of a brand, the weight of a brand in a project, which was very helpful. Yeah.
Cool. So, we're going to be going through portfolios today. What was your first portfolio like?
Good question. I think I got out of school right at a time where you could sort of choose between having a physical portfolio and a digital portfolio. Internet wasn't big like it is right now, but there were definitely like CD-ROMs and all that. So, you know, you could choose, you know, to either like print your portfolio and just stake it and just show your, you know, your work on a large book, or actually, you know, get like a little presentation in a CD-ROM and just take your heavy laptop, because at the time they were very heavy, and to just, you know. So I chose the latter, really. To me, it was you know, a lot more practical, and it felt like the other version was sort of like about to die.
Yeah.
It was
Yeah.
already, you know, older designers still used it a lot,
Yeah.
but I felt it was a lot more comfortable, and it actually, it was a much more of a playful way to show your work.
Sure.
And interact with whoever, you know, you needed to interview with.
Yeah. I remember back in art school days, like we had a whole application process where you needed to go through like the whole, you had to learn how to print everything, you had to learn how to do
Yes.
everything. And then the year when they changed that you could bring it on like a floppy drive or a CD or a thumb drive, it was like
Huge
earth-shattering,
change, yes.
earth-shattering.
Huge change,
And like even
yeah.
now it's funny to think like, oh yeah, here's my like flash drive, let's plug this in. Like you
Right.
can like go to a computer, you aren't able to plug it in
right.
anymore.
Yeah, my guess is that in a few decades we'll just have like holograms. you
Just
know,
there
or
all the
just
time.
You'll wear some glasses that you'll be able to see the work or whatever it is that you need to see in there. So everything tends to be less physical, apparently.
Yeah. Well, as it stands today, we've got our Behance portfolios to go through.
Sure.
So let's kind of jump into the first portfolio. You know, what are some things that jump out right on the top, you know, when you're looking at this first portfolio from Brian?
Right. So what I noticed here that really caught my eye was the presentation. I think you know, there's a huge difference between a project that is like properly presented and like well displayed. It can, you know, it can turn like a really average project, something that's not really outstanding, like a good presentation, a good setup, can really take it to the next level, and you know, actually make it look a lot more desirable and
Sure.
interesting and appealing. Whereas like you can maybe have like an amazing idea, great execution, the project is looking great, but if the presentation is kind of weak, you know, this great project is just going to become an average project. So Brian, in this case, you can tell he's taken a lot of time and effort in presenting his work. It may be, you know, I think it's regardless of whether this is a real project or a self-initiated project. The fact that it's like really well presented, the fact that, you know, he's taking care of the light, he's you know, like considered like some elements like around here to I don't know, to complete the
Sure,
presentation
yeah.
and to give it like, you know, a special feel to it is really good. So this is definitely something that if you have to set your portfolio. Let me see if I can get back
Let's
to
refresh the page.
Let me do that. So this is definitely something that you might want to.
Let me just click on his linked back there.
Yeah, there you go. So there's also there's one thing that really caught my eye here. It isn't really like this first project. It's really interesting because he's not really taking photos of a piece that he did. I think this is more like of an installation, like a piece or something. But it's really interesting how he's showing us the different steps that he's taken to set up this, you know, this presentation,
Yeah.
and how, you know, all the work that he's been through and the different stages of the process and everything, just to make something, because I've seen a lot of portfolios on Behance that are actually presented like this well, and it makes such a huge difference. You know, in this case, I don't feel like Brian is trying to present anything in particular. It's just like creating a very interesting composition.
Like a still life almost of like
Exactly.
of objects. Yeah.
Exactly, which he actually achieved, because it's really nice. But what I'm trying to say is that it's worth going through all this work and this effort to present your work.
Sure.
Because it's really going to make a very big difference. In the end, presenting your work is almost as, as if you were presenting yourself. The impression you want to make. And, it's really important. Your first impression is really, really important. So the first impression when you see someone's portfolio or project is also very important, because it will most likely determine whether you want to continue investigating this person's work. So you can see there's across his portfolio, there's a lot of care and attention to
It's kind of got that polish that kind of goes throughout the portfolio.
Right, right, exactly. And also I think this consistency is really important when you show it to, I don't know, your clients or someone like a potential recruiter, whatever. I mean, it tells, it shows that you're someone who really takes time and care to present your work well, that you're thoughtful, your design is not just I execute this, boom, it's done.
Yeah.
Design goes, beyond the actual execution of the project. It's just, also the way you present it and everything. It's so many things: the lights, the props, the all these things, And so, I definitely encourage to do this, even if it's a self-initiated project. So if you're, let's say you're a student and you just got out of school, and then you're starting out there, and your portfolio is kind of small. So you want to create some projects so you can just, bulk it up a little bit.
So there's those passion projects, right? Getting into that.
Right. So essentially the idea is that, you maybe in your spare time or something, or just because you want to, create a mock-up, a project that is not actually a real commission project, but you need to show that you can actually do things in your portfolio. As well as creating the project, is the presentation is extremely important, because most likely a professional will be able to tell whether this is a real or a fake project. It doesn't matter. But what's important is the execution and the presentation.
Sure.
So let's say you design you do a series of t-shirt designs for whatever project. So don't just get the vector outline with the art on it and just put it in your portfolio.
Just slap a logo on there that you made.
Exactly. So the difference is humongous. Try to find someone that you feel that's gonna wear this T-shirt nicely, and find a good set up a good place. Find the right light, and then even if you can, just print the artwork already on the T-shirt for real, even if it's just for this one piece, because all of a sudden
it's just as much about the work as it is the environment in which the work sort of exists in.
Absolutely, absolutely. Because ultimately, the thing about doing a self-initiated project is it's a little bit of a cheating, because you don't have to go through the actual process of dealing with customers or someone telling you, I don't like this,
the feedback,
or change this,
that kind of thing.
So you're really free to do whatever you like. So it's important that since you have this advantage, you try to make it look as as presentable and professional as possible.
Yeah, I guess that's a good point. Is if you have the opportunity where you can control every element of what you're presenting, take the opportunity to do that as well as you possibly can.
Exactly.
Because when you are a professional, you don't have that opportunity in most cases to just do whatever you want and not suffer any consequences for it.
Absolutely. And especially when you're starting, the idea of okay, I have very little work to show. I have to show more work. And the industry is not going to come to me. Nobody knows me. So in that process of thinking about what to show and what to design, what to create, I think it's very important to think, strategically. What is the right project to do? How to present it? So you just don't go way too far. Because after all, you're when you're out of school, that's when you start. To learn design. School is just, ideally getting you ready to start learning.
Yeah.
It's not
sort of giving you the tools to go out there and do what you need to do, but you don't know everything once you step out. I think that's art, design, anything that you've studied. It's not like
Sure.
you're ready to go out there.
No, no.
And start being like,
No,
yes, I'm a professional.
For sure. So this is, this is the one of the beautiful things about any of these disciplines within the creative industry is that you go to school, but you're not really becoming a designer there, but you know that afterwards in your career you will always be learning.
Sure.
You'll turn 80 and you'll still be learning new things, and so
Yeah.
that really makes a big difference.
So let's go on to the next tab that we have here
Okay.
from Miguel.
Right. Okay. So the one thing when I was looking at this portfolio, there are two things actually that are connected to what we were
Yeah, we
saying.
were just talking about.
Yeah,
Yeah.
we were just talking about this as in, so how do you present yourself? So, as a designer or creative, there's like your work and then there's you. So both are pretty important, I would say, because you're going to be
just
dealing,
a little bit.
yeah, no, because you're going to be dealing with a human being, and then also like first thing, I definitely need to be interested in your work. But then if I am, obviously the next step will be to find out who's behind this work.
Yeah.
And so at that point, I think the same care and attention that we put in the way we present our work is true for the way we present ourselves
Sure.
professionally. So in this case, I noticed that Miguel, he's got a brief description of himself. And so what I notice here is that he is, what he's doing is perfectly understandable, which is to say, I can actually do a lot of different things. I can be a photographer, I can be a designer, I can be an illustrator, I can paint, I can do all sorts of things.
Yeah.
Now, to a certain extent, this is great because it'll make you more versatile. But the truth is that no one is great at all these things at once. This is the truth. And so, there's a saying in Spanish that goes, apprentice of everything, master of nothing.
Yeah.
Right? So I think, especially if you're starting,
Yeah.
there's a tendency to try to, market yourself, sell yourself, and try to, come off as, skillful, prepared, and professional as possible. But the truth is, like, you can't fool someone that's been in the job for a long time, regardless of the words
Sure.
and titles, whatever your work will, I will know in a
Yeah.
matter of seconds, whether
Yeah.
your work is matching your description of yourself or not. You know what I mean? So,
And you kind of mentioned like that, like in this, like a couple seconds. So like when you're looking at a portfolio, like how much time are you spending at looking at a portfolio before it's like like when you're just
I in my case, and I would imagine that's true for a lot of other designers, it's like a pretty quick impression. Like you will know really fast if this is something that you're that really speaks to you. There's something in there that's like, I'm interested in so and then afterwards you're going to try to see, okay, so who's behind this work?
sure.
But I think whether you're starting or not, like honesty goes a long way. You will always be better off being very honest about where you're at as a professional. Whether you're starting or I think it's always it's going to help you rather than
Sure.
trying to cause this incredible impression right off
Right.
the bat. Yeah.
So I mean, if you find yourself in a situation, especially when you're starting out, where you've just got tons of work that's sort of unfocused, that that you've got lots of different projects from all over, like things that you're interested in. What's a good strategy to fix that, for lack of a better term, like, or how to like refocus that?
Right. Well, one of the things that I think can help you is, like, for example, in this portfolio in particular, if you scroll all the way down, I mean, I haven't counted them, but there are probably here like about, I don't know, 18 to 20 projects or something. So to me, and probably to any other professional, it takes about 6 projects to really see what your capabilities are and what kind of work you do. So it's not true. The idea of like the more the better, that is not really true.
Sure.
I think it's about quality over quantity. So in fact, if you have like about, I don't know, 20 projects in there, it can get a bit overwhelming, confusing, distracting. The fact that, you know, I need to figure out like, okay, so how many different, you know, things is this person doing, you know? Is it like, or is this a photography project? Is this a branding project? Is this a, you know, editorial? Is this UX, UI? What's going on here? So that's especially for those who are looking for someone to hire or whatever, it's a pretty fast, agile process. So they're not going to take a lot of time, you know.
Yeah. Yeah, kind of like the idea of the, you know, resume is like having everything that like you're good at like on that first page, because that's kind of like what you've got when you're looking at like a recruiter or something like that. It's like have that.
The most relevant experience should be surfaced to the top. And
Then,
yeah.
And like the things you want to keep doing, like if there's something that you're interested in that just like, yeah, like I've done all these different things, but like this is something that I find that I'm like A, good at, and B, want to keep doing.
I think this is the case of our next you know, creative right here. This is something I noticed about the studio in France. Immediately, the first impression I got was like letters and paper and print all around right away. So also there's, you know, aside of the fact that the presentation is really nice, but really if I were looking for someone to do, I don't know, to design my website, I would probably not hire these people.
Right.
However, if I'm interested in print,
Yeah.
in poster design, editorial design, you know, typography-based projects, whatever, I will know that these guys are definitely candidates right off the bat, because the projects, like, you know, their portfolio is like narrowed down to this one particular kind of discipline, which helps them to get the kind of projects that they like to do, because you know, I bet they're not, you know, showcasing all this editorial work just by accident. They probably like what they do. They probably like to work with print and magazines and books and posters and whatnot. And so this is actually what they're showing. So this is the kind of work they're going to be getting. And so I think this is a very effective way to, you know, position yourself.
Yeah.
And
so we were talking about like editorial design and print design. You mentioned in your bio when you first like started with Behance, and you've kind of gone now into more like editorial design, things like that. What brought you to that? Like, what are things that like that attracted you to editorial design as compared to, you know, you're doing logos in the past, or like other branding? Like, what was something that just that speaks to you for that? Right.
In this particular case, it was a little bit of a how to say, like of a challenge. So at 99U, we had this quarterly magazine, which we'd been doing for quite a while, and we had the chance to take it to the next level and create like a pretty solid, full-on, full-color magazine, hardcover, and all that stuff.
Yeah.
And that's what got me into it. Also, the fact that I love editorial design, but I really never had probably the chance to get to tackle a project that you know that would have continuity, because this one does. It's a quarterly publication, so every 3 months is a new magazine, and every magazine is a living being in itself. Like it's a story. It starts from page 1 and it ends at page 100, whatever. And then there's a rhythm to it. So there are a lot of things, and each and every page can be like an entire, like a separate design. There's so much richness in editorial design, really.
So you can kind of go wild with each page, but then also have to sort of tie it back to itself, or
it really
or
depends on the
do
creative approach that you want to take. You can go and have the super creative, visually powerful publication, or you can just focus a lot more on the content,
Mm-hmm.
and then just like make sure that the experience is flawless, and that so there are different ways to tackle editorial design, but you can definitely play with a lot of the basic elements of graphic design.
Yeah, let's take a look at some of those, like as an example.
So the idea that you can combine vector typography, photography, and colors, just like children do, but at a different level. It's a pretty cool profession. So and also like the way it's presented, like the importance of
Yeah.
color. Also, this is something you can actually touch and feel in your hand. So somehow it's important to try to, make you feel almost like what it
Yeah,
would
you
be
can.
to
Yeah,
have it
you
in
can
your
imagine
hands.
it. Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah. So
'cause
like instead of
it's a sensorial
posting like
experience.
instead of like just posting, because if
Yeah.
you're doing a lot of this work, you're in something like InDesign or like a similar type of program, and like you can go quickly and like just post a screenshot and be like, this is what I worked on,
Right, right.
and be
Yeah.
in and out in 2 seconds
Yeah,
and show what you
yeah,
did.
yeah.
Or you can go those extra steps of presenting it well, like going through like
Sure.
the photography, or
Sure.
in this one they've got they're showing it in real life, like where it was and things like that.
Yeah, yeah.
Whether it's added digitally or not, like you can kind of do that on your own.
Absolutely. Plus, it's a very sensorial thing too. There's really like a lot of designers actually, when they get like in their mail a book or something, they might even smell it because it's it's the feel of it, it's
Yeah.
the smell of it. It's like ooh, that's a very within the professionals tend to do that. Not all of them, but some do.
Some do.
Yeah, I've seen it many times before. So so yeah, definitely. Again, I would say like these projects are like a good representation of what it is to sort of like focus your portfolio in one field. It doesn't mean that you can't do other things, but just if you people are going to get lost if you try to say that you do so many things. It's better to sort of and so it's also the presentation. The presentation is really good.
Yeah.
So all around, I think this is a pretty good example of a pretty solid portfolio, I would say.
So now when you've got these folks obviously have established their portfolio pretty well. Like they're focused. Like you get when you go to this page, you're like, got it. I know what they're doing. Like I'm clear.
Yeah.
When you're at this level, or you're a level, like yourself, creative director, things like that. When you want to show passion projects, like now, how do you sort of go the other way if you want to show something that you're just like, this is something I tried. Like is that valuable? Like does that detract from what they're doing?
No, I think passion projects. If you have the time and the energy, I think you should definitely do it. When I started, like my interest was music, so nobody knew me, and I knew the music industry wouldn't come to me, the bands wouldn't come to me, so I would have to go and try to get myself involved in whatever I could. Not to mention like for no money or anything. It's just because I wanted
yeah.
to. It was the passion that you're talking about, and also because that was the kind of work I wanted to get. So so I offered my services for free, while the people that I designed for were also like my my sparring, like the people you
Yeah, the
just
sparring
used to
part,
learn,
yeah.
and train, because that's you experiment with these people really. So after a while, you end up having like a few projects related to the thing you like to do, and that's when real work starts to come in related to what you want to do, which is probably what's happening to the studio right now. So I started like getting projects to design like gig posters or vinyl records or whatever.
Yeah.
And I realized that was because that's what my work was showing.
Right. So you mentioned like the idea, like I think when you're talking about earlier in your bio, like school, and like you got out where it was still the physical and like there was less digital, or just the way of showing your work. And you also just mentioned like the sparring partners, and it's like you're learning from those people also.
Yeah.
You know, how do you think that translates online now? Like that you can follow and talk with all these different people, you know, how do you navigate that now if you're a young designer? You know, are you trying to find people that are just like you know, that are worlds like away from you? Like how do you...
That's a good question, man. I think there's a, this is a tricky moment, or at least that's what I'm seeing with young designers, and it's a tricky moment because you have access to so much work that I definitely didn't have access to.
Yeah.
I would buy a book, and whatever you saw in that book, that's where you would get
That's what,
inspiration.
that was it.
That's what you would, you would learn, and then, by talking to other creatives, etc. But today, you have access to see what amazing professionals are doing, just like from anywhere in the world, anytime.
Yeah.
And so, imitating work is a great way to learn, so long as you don't claim it.
Yeah, that I
be
did this.
your own,
Yeah.
You know what I mean? And so this is probably the downfall of like having so much access to creative work, and also the fact that sort of like design is like sort of like standardizing a little bit. I don't know if that's the right word, but it's becoming like global kind of thing. Like the tendencies are becoming global.
Yeah, you kind of like don't have the pockets of like design worlds. Like there's like the one side of everyone's like communicating all that's happening.
20 years ago, it was a lot easier to tell like, oh, this is European design. This is South American. This is English. This is whatever. And I feel like with the internet and everything, there's a democratization, or whatever the word is, of creativity a little bit, in the sense that whatever is popular in a popular place, that's what we all want to do. So that's probably the downfall of like having universal access to. The good thing, especially with Behance, not that I work there, but the good thing about Behance is that it's helped to spread, especially through our curators who are choosing and curating the best creative work out there. So that is definitely helping design and creativity to reach parts of the world where design was not really like it was like underdeveloped.
Sure.
It wasn't part of the.
And you think about that with the portfolio reviews, right?
Exactly. Oh.
The hosts.
That's always
I have seen amazing images of like people in Nigeria hosting.
Right. Where they've created their creative community for themselves.
Absolutely. Last year I was also in Dubai, and I saw like this young Muslim community like doing amazing work, where design wasn't really that big, and now it's like taken off, and that's also true for a lot of other parts in the world. So,
I guess it's a good point, because you're talking about some of like the bigger design communities, and you're thinking of like European, like Swiss design, for an example, or like Italian design. Like those are all now like going into everything, but then there are other communities now that are popping up that like you never, like no one ever knew about before.
No,
and
absolutely.
Like
and I think
their voices are kind of now
a lot of
coming
interesting things can happen now, because yes, it's true that design was a very Western thing, and a very European thing, but then also reached America, etc. But it was a very Western thing, and even though right now this is the reference to a lot of like emerging cultures and design, I think there's going to be an interesting mix and interesting tonalities, like things that are going to be unseen, like interesting interpretations of what we call Western design, adaptations to other cultures, and this is going to start happening more and more, like younger generations of creatives, taking their approach on what's cool design, and so I think Behance is definitely doing a great job at that.
Sure.
Yeah, for sure.
Maybe you want to talk about what Portfolio Review Week is a little bit more.
So for those of you actually that are just joining, because I can see in the chat there are some newcomers, we are streaming our first portfolio review live. So community members have submitted their portfolios, and we've chosen them to kind of go over. But the reason why it's happening now is because we're in the midst of Portfolio Review Week. And so this is community-run, community-hosted events across the globe. people get together, they review portfolios together, they hang out in sort of a meetup style environment. And like we were talking about earlier, it really, it's not just in these sort of hubs, this New York, LA, creative communities that are already there. It's really in these sort of smaller, obscure places where they're really creating a community for themselves. And so we've loved sort of seeing that happen, and we're hoping that we're going to do more sort of live events like this to kind of amplify what it means to review portfolios and how important it is to get feedback from professionals, from peers, from really anyone. So we really appreciate you, Mark, coming along and
thank you guys for having me.
With us.
Awesome. Yeah. Any other closing things you want to mention, or?
No, just be very honest with where you're at in your career, what you do, and just if you're in this for the money, maybe not the right choice. If you're in this because you want to, be a successful person, that's fine, but try not to just keep looking at the end of the road of success. Just focus on every step of the way, and just get better and better, and eventually, success will come. And by success, I mean, making a living of a profession you like and enjoying yourself.
Yeah.
So, there.
Thank you very much, Mark.
Thank you.
So our next category is actually interaction design, and joining us to review portfolios is Hector Ouilhet. He's the design director for Google Search and some of the Google Assist tools. So without further ado, let's sort of introduce him. Hey everyone, welcome back. For those of us that are just joining, we are doing a Behance portfolio review live. If you are on YouTube, if you can change over to behance.net/live, you'll be able to participate in the chat there. So without further ado, we'd like to welcome Hector. Hey Hector.
Hi.
How are you?
Great, excited.
So Hector was born in Mexico City, and he's always been fascinated by the tension between technology, art, and design. His major focus is attempting to harness that tension to create products and experiences that really make our lives more productive, enjoyable, and inspiring. Presently, he leads design for all of Google Search and Assist related products. And you want to maybe talk a little bit more about yourself and what you do?
Sure. First of all, thank you for having me.
Yeah, of
I'm
course.
very
Being
excited
here.
to be in front of all of you. I think my career was a bit tricky because I didn't really know what I wanted to be. When I started, there was the notion of interaction design or UX was not really formed. So I had a hard time understanding what I wanted to be. I started through fine arts. My mom is an artist, and I love painting and sculpture. So I have that side. Then my dad came and said, well, if you do that, you're probably going to not really have enough money to survive. So I strongly disencourage
All those
you through
wealthy
that path.
sculptors we know of.
Exactly. So he encouraged me to try engineering. And he saw something in me. I love coding or creating. So I just like creating. My medium was yet to be discovered. So it was either through painting or sculpture, and then through code, I decided, oh, look, this is not that bad. Studying engineering school, I found out two things. One, that I was a terrible coder. But I was closer to what I thought I want it to be, where it was some creation through technology that make people better. So that put me to different jobs. And then I discovered this notion of interaction design, and I did a master's in that. And the important part of that school was being able to be with other people that were different than me, a very diverse set of multidisciplinary set of creatives. So writers, architects, engineers, graphic designers, motion designers. And the whole point was to try to solve a problem together. And what school taught me was how to acknowledge other people's point of views. And some of them were better, some of them were not. Sometimes how to raise my voice, when to shut up. But also try to figure out, after all the chatter, all the noise, because as you can imagine the three of us are trying to solve a problem. We all have different perspectives, right?
Sure.
And it's important to abstract and understand that our goal is to try to solve a problem. So through interaction design, through user experience, I think the main goal is to try to solve problems and solve them in a way that is either delightful, fun, easy, or whatever optimizing for. But at the end, you're solving people's problems. So when you have a diverse point of view, it's actually very nice. It's very robust, because usually the solution is something that you don't think by yourself. So that's a little about me. I've been moving around the world for a while with the same intent, that I love to understand different perspectives. So every time I have moved from a city or a country, it gives me a better understanding of of all the things that I don't know, right? So I feel there's so many things yet to know. And for those small things that I do know, I get a better point of view. So I know I like to do this in a more intense way. So the way I like my coffee, the way I go to work, the way I like to smell, the way I like to walk, it's all being influenced by all the places that I've been. And I pay attention to how other people do it. And then I always question why I do the things I do and why it cannot always be better. Because I do believe, like, through design, everything can be better, a little bit better. So that's more or less.
That's amazing. You carried sort of your life experiences into exactly what you do, and I think it's added value for sure.
Yeah, because I think that way it's more fun.
Yeah, definitely. So without further ado, let's get into the first portfolio. So
Cool.
this is, if I can see correctly, Samuel Scalzo. He's from Belgium. So walk me through sort of what you've seen, your impressions and things
Yeah,
like
the
that.
first impression is it's nice work. It's like there's a nice crafting to it. So what I like from the highest level, I just see it has few projects, which is something that I appreciate.
Sure.
I think Mark was saying that when you have way more than six, it starts to become a little bit overwhelming, because I think a portfolio is as much as what you show and what you decide not to show.
Right.
Right? If you decide to show too much, it's because there's a lack of something. You're trying to show, just speaks most likely that to your lack of understanding of the wider goal, which is okay, because I used to that all the time, especially when I was starting. So it's important to understand that the nice balance between depth and breadth.
Okay.
And what I saw in most of the portfolios here, they have a lot of breadth and almost no depth. And when solving problems, it's important to have depth.
You gotta go.
It's really important to understand that you have a clear perspective on the problem that you're trying to solve.
Right.
And in this case, the problem is how to tell the world that you're a good designer. And I don't think people show enough of that process, or of that thinking, of that thoroughness about that problem solving. We see the result. We don't see much of the process. So specifics about this portfolio is there's some nice graphic design, there's some nice type. But when I went into the details in each of the projects, say for instance, I'm gonna pick
Yeah,
this
let's open
one.
it up.
It's attractive. I'll scroll and it feels like, okay, this is something that it looks cool. Probably do something nice. But already I scroll 2-3 pages and I don't really understand what is the problem that's trying to be solved.
Sure.
And especially the way I'm coming through this is through the product design perspective. So my job is to create products that resonate with people. Make products that will make someone, somewhere in the world, lives better. And it's hard to tell that just by the end result.
Sure.
It's super important to try to understand, like, say, for instance, Roxanne, what is a problem that you, if you're my target user,
Right.
what is the problem that you're having, and how technology is helping you solve that problem? So as a designer, I will try to understand your pain, whatever that is, and try to map it to ideas, and then probably have a mechanism to evaluate ideas. Which one is better? How do we do that? Well, usually we test it.
Right.
Say with you. Even if you're not Roxanne, you could be that demographic or
Right.
somebody that has a similar problem that Roxanne, right? So I can
Problem
show
I
you.
didn't know that I had.
Yes. Maybe.
Maybe.
But then you test it, right? You do a little bit of simple testing. I remember early in my career, I just tested with my colleagues or with people in the street. And it's not that hard, right? Because most of us have similar problems. So you say, hey, for this problem, what do you think about this?
Right.
And see how they react and do it again and do it again. I think part of interaction design and user experience is important to capture that process. How do you arrive to this solution? Because I'm sure it's a beautiful solution, but from the way it's presented, lacks that little bit of depth. Like, how do you arrive to this? What are the things that you didn't do to do this? That's super important. When I look into portfolios, it's something that I want to see. It's a little bit of that process and that little bit of rigor in validating the idea. So,
Not just sort of like the glossy end product, but show some of the maybe things before.
correct, because I think Mark was saying earlier, I think with today's technology, there's one of the benefits is this access, right? So everybody can download the template for this. Everybody can open it in Photoshop and Illustrator. I can change something, export it, and can say it's mine, right? With so technology allows us to level the playing field really quickly in terms of the fidelity of the outcome. So everybody could do amazing work in seconds, right? So how do you distinguish that noise from what is actually real work or true work? So I think that in today's world, you have to put a little more focus in that rigor, into that process, in that decision making, in that validation that lead you to this screen, right? Like, it's not just about the fidelity. Like I said, I think it looks very pretty. It's more about what other artifacts you could have that proves that this design is better than the previous design you had. So when I look at the portfolio, is things like type and colors, which resonate, they're nice. Like the palette, it just feels coherent. It's something that is more like a spec. This is something that I will see usually delivered to the production team, the engineering team, somebody's gonna build it. But I think that the role of the designer, that's a piece of the role, which is important. But the other piece is, how do you solving a problem? And that thing is critical to be captured, right? When people that we look at Google, or when I talk with other designers in the industry, we want to look for people that are able to see a given problem, even if it's too difficult, and how do they go about it?
Sure.
So let me go back, for instance, to another of his projects. You can see the dog tracking app. I was looking at it this morning and it looks very nice, right? Again, it's very nice, but then it's like, after seeing this screenshot, how do I know that he's solving, what is the problem that he's solving, and why is this better than any other dog tracking app, right? Because there's several of those.
Yeah.
So I can imagine that Samuel is having when he was doing this, he was trying to think, oh, how do I stand myself out? How do people notice me, right? And I think there's not really shortcuts. I think it's through the hard work and showing how do you arrive to the solution.
Right.
So would you suggest maybe adding some more text or like, a description area to share that, or, in an image form? What's the best way to share the backstory and
Yeah.
show the problem that you're trying to solve and
Yeah.
how you're going to solve it?
I think the medium could be text or could be images, but it's all about how do you tell that story. I was, a few months ago, I was in Dubai, and we're doing a workshop with this really young new artists. They were like no interaction designers. But in the workshop, we're just trying to solve how do you create an app for coffee? That was the brief. And it's amazing to see how people get so creative when you just give them a little bit of a brief like this is the problem you need to solve. And then basically the workshop was about the process or the steps that you follow in order to arrive to a solution that will resonate. So it's all about like quick iteration, prototyping, and validation, and do it many, many times, right? So if you're trying to translate that to a portfolio piece, is how do you capture the brief? How do you capture the process? How do you capture iteration? And how do you capture the rigor that went through all of these steps to give you a solution?
Right.
Unlike other disciplines, I think the end result is really difficult to judge without having the context of the process or the rigor of decision making.
Right.
What is nice about Behance and the way it's laid out the pages, you can have this process built down or up or around the work, right? There's so many ways you can show why I picked to have a beautiful face of a dog facing me.
Right.
Well, because I picked one that was showing its, I don't know, its legs, that was not as impressive. But just showing that little bit of decision making, it's like, oh, okay, he thought about this, right? Like, why does your screen has 8 and not 7 screens? Why not 11 or why not 2, right? When I'm looking at all the work, I'm questioning all of this. Because what I'm trying every time I see somebody else's portfolio is, it's very hard to do a portfolio because it's a little bit of a vulnerable moment for a designer because you expose some of you.
Yeah, we hear that a lot.
And I empathize with that, right? So I went through that a lot. And so I tried to put myself through that person and see what that person was trying to achieve. Usually when you're starting your career, you just want to put everything out there, right? Because basically I think it's a good actually process to put as much as possible, output increases, and over time you start seeing a little bit of what you're good at and where you're not so good at. And you start trimming or you start putting a little bit of focus. So it's hard to understand through what I see is the choices that were made in order to arrive to this outcome. So without that, it's hard for me to say, how difficult is this work? How impactful is this work, right? So what I'm looking for is for impact at the end of the day. Impact translated into people's solvents being solved in a way. I think that's the role of technology, trying to make our lives better. So I'm sure if I have an app for finding my dog, in my problem of losing my dog, it's a fantastic thing to have, right? Because you can imagine if you lose your dog.
We're both dog owners, we know.
Yeah.
I knew that.
Strikes a chord.
I Googled you before. No, but I mean, it's if you try to put yourself in the user's perspective, like probably you feel a little bit terrified or pissed or lost. So when that's the user's mental state, and then the first screen you see is a login, is that really what you want to see? What are the steps that you're going to go in order to calm you down, make sure it's okay? What are the things that say you will do? Would you call your friends?
Find
Would
your
you?
dog.
Yeah.
Log
Like
in here.
breathe, like breathe.
What were you going to call your neighbor? You're going to do what, right?
Yeah.
And then from that, try to say what other people would do in order to find their dog.
Sure.
And over, you build a pattern and you say, oh, most of the people call their friends because most likely the dog went something that they know or whatever. I'm making things up, right?
Yeah.
But this, you see the process that I'm going.
Sure.
So that influences the number of screens. So what screen will have probably like a big ass button say, hey, call 911 or call whatever that can help you, right? Because losing a dog is something that is very personal and it's really strong. It's really sad. I think it's a fantastic problem to solve, but it's just not shown in the way through this review or through this portfolio.
Let's jump to the next one, the next portfolio. On that
Next tab over there.
So this is Sanket Patel from India. So Hector, I think you've got a chance to look at this a little bit. So walk me through what you've seen here.
I've seen a very cheerful and optimistic creative person that has a lot to say, which is good. There's a lot of breadth in the portfolio. After seeing 3-5 projects, I got a little bit lost because unlike the previous one, I cannot see really a style.
Sure.
As a style, right? This person seems to be trying to learn different things and trying to see where he is good or where he's not that good, which I think is a good step in your career.
Right.
When I went into deep, for instance, here, and I was trying to see if you're, again, I'm judging this from the point of view of user experience and product design, probably seeing an icon is not the first thing that's going to draw me into it, right? Because again, I'm coming from the perspective of how is this solving somebody's problem, right? So just seeing that is not really helping. And remember, like the first impression of someone's portfolio, it's critical,
It's
Right.
everything.
right? So if you see the whole level, there's a lot of things. It's hard to know. You go in, and it's also hard to know. That said, I think there's a lot of carefulness and crafting to it, so that's good.
Yeah.
That's awesome, and it's awesome that there's effort into aligning things, into making things aligned and coherent. So that's nice, right? I think that Sanket is doing a good job there. He's doing a good job in showing how clean are his UIs, etc. But once I get through that layer and I start looking to see what is this screen trying to solve, then that question is not really answered. So then I scroll up and I try to say, is there some other problem trying to be solved? And also I don't find it, right? And I'm sure it's there. It's just a matter of when you do curation or editing of the things you decide to post is what is that narrative that you're trying to tell?
Sure.
In this case, the app is for property app. It says application for managed property and an advertised property. So I think a good thing to do is to list out the problems that people have when they face this sort of situation. When people go about and trying to find a house, what are the things that they have in their heads? What are their constraints? Where are they coming from? And what are the things that technology can help optimize? Right? So it's, if you tell that, let's say that's a narrative, how do you do it in a way that will influence the way you choose to say this gallery?
Right.
I picked this gallery because most of the people that look for houses are attracted by a big photo of a beautiful home. Okay, that's good. So, but that would be good to put a little bit of rigor behind that decision. And you can also say something like, after being attracted by the photo, they click on it and they have whatever, few seconds to make a decision and move on to the next one. Imagine that's the problem you're trying to solve. How you do that in a way through you have the UI around you, right? So it's throughout this portfolio, the story is not really there. I think the materials are there, so kudos for that. I think good job for that. It's just a matter of how do you arrange it and tell the story to see Roxanne or you or anybody is able to see this. Oh, look, it's making buying houses easier. I want it, right? So you want to be able to solve that problem through all the projects.
Right. Question for you, actually. We touched upon this a little bit, but so in your field, interaction, even UI, UX, everything that you create ends up on a screen in some way, shape, or form. So how does that sort of play a role when you're presenting your portfolio? What are some best practices to make sure that when someone's viewing your design, they can feel like they can see it in real life, right? They can almost feel like they can reach out and touch it.
Yeah, that's a good question. I will treat the portfolio as a design problem itself. So if you put
Like you're thinking.
It's a great,
Yeah.
if you put yourself in the shoes of the person that's about to review it, first of all, you have to think about where you want to go in your career. What is that thing that you want to do? Let's say I want to be hired by a creative agency. Let's just say that's an example. I want to be hired by Behance, right? Just to put it more concrete. If that's your goal, that's where you want to go, then say, what are the type of people that work at Behance? What do they do? And try to find as much information about that. Ask questions, go visit the office, meet people that know some people, and eventually build a point of view of who will be reviewing your portfolio. Because we're all different people, right? Once you have an idea of who is your target audience, you can start designing towards that. Not design for everybody, just try to design for that person. Because your question was, how do you translate this notion of you can actually feel it or touch it, right? So the more the output reflects who I am, the more successful we'll be. So think in the design problem is, well, I know that person, I know this person likes to do this and that, I know they don't like this and that. With those inputs, with that intel, you should be able to craft your portfolio in a way that will touch those and will touch the highlights and minimize the lowlights, right? It's pretty simple. It's another design problem. So, and then you go in the constraints of Behance or whatever you're hosting your portfolio. There's certain constraints in this case that you have a grid of images, and each image, when you tap, you have a larger surface. So those are the constraints of the medium. You have other constraints, like back in the days, my portfolios were printed. The constraints were whatever you can fit in a paper, right? In this case, the constraints are different because actually it's an infinite amount of paper.
Yeah.
So, but it's still purely constraints of the medium. Design thinking about who is your audience, understand it, and then tailor your output or your output towards that. And one thing to understand is you probably won't get it right the first time, and that's fine because design is all about that process of getting it better. But it's important to understand that your first version, what are you doing to pay attention of what things could be better? So if I were a person trying to apply for this Behance, let's say, role, I will go about and test it with other people that are similar situations like the Behance, right? I will go to other creative agencies or other places and show, hey, what do you think about this? And then learn from that feedback and incorporate it and do it again and then do it again. And over time, you'll get good at that.
Yeah.
Does that answer your question?
Yeah,
or not?
absolutely.
Yeah, I think that's a great point. Also, like, you know, I think for years we've always seen a lot of portfolios where everyone kind of just like throws in all their images or whatever they are, you know, for interaction and like no thought behind what are the strengths of like the platform they're using, what are like the weaknesses of it. Like you kind of just said, like the constraints. Perfect thinking of that. And I think like keeping that in mind, kind of like how Mark
Right.
was talking about, like just knowing what
Designing
you're-
for the
yeah,
audience
yeah.
and designing for like the platform even, because it can be so different.
And I'm
Yeah.
sure all these, they're amazing designers and creatives, right? Like super smart people. You can see it. It's just a matter of which pieces do you pick to show and which
Yeah.
ones you don't.
Yeah.
Because all the process that they went through to arrive to some of this work, I'm sure it was hard. I'm sure they put a lot of good work behind it, some time and thought. So how do you capture that into your work, right? It's not just, like I said at the beginning, it's not just pure breadth, it's about depth.
Yep.
How you're solving someone's problem and why. So I think that's where a lot of the new portfolios lack of that. I've seen the other extreme that is just pure process and it's like no resolution, and that's the opposite, right? It's just like, this person has no point of view,
Right.
right? So that's
So it
also
needs to
not
be
good.
somewhere in the middle, yeah.
Yeah, it's just validating your work through some rigor.
Right.
Should be by your own point of view, by your experience, or through user testing, by validating. So it's a combination of both.
Sure.
Because another thing that helps when I review portfolios is, I don't know if Sanket, in this case, was thinking of himself as the user. So say, if he was able to print this design or put in a prototype and actually put himself in the shoes of the person looking for a home and then opening his app and see what you will do. Right? You have a thing, what would you press and why would you press that? Why would you press this other thing? You might be pressing the happy face. What is that? And then go through that mental process, right? It's actually a really simple technique. You just step out,
Use yourself.
Use
use yourself as the target
Yeah.
audience. I mean, it's not ideal, but it's a great step.
Yeah, right. Let's head over to the third portfolio. Make sure we get some love there. So this is Alex from Ukraine.
It has some nice work. Some of the things that I'm starting seeing is this person, Alex, starts to put some of the problem here, which
Sure.
was good.
Oh, great.
Like a little bit of that. It just in terms of strategy of your problem, of your solution is, I wouldn't put the brief so below this. Like, again, I'm coming from product interaction design, so this screen, while it's attractive, is not really solving anything, right? So it's like the brief is a little bit, it's hidden. The solution is there too, but it's also a little disconnected. And then you have the result. So I think the intention is there. It just lacks a little bit of more rigor into saying this brief, this solution, this happened, right? Right now it's very like, okay. And then you have a lot of growth, which is probably something good. But it's like, how do you arrive to that? And what were the steps? What were the decisions that you made in order to come to this, right? So, which I believe, if this is an app that has these amazing results, it will be good to show how in live, right? Like a photo of somebody using it, a photo of somebody using it before and after,
Sure.
or what happened when I used it. Well, you know what? I saved 10 hours, so now I have this 10 extra hours to go find dogs. because on the previous app or whatever, right? But suddenly, if you start quantifying that user value, then it becomes really, really solid.
Right.
Right, so how do you capture that in your portfolio? This one, for instance, was a little bit difficult to understand why, or like the rationale behind the solutions, or the articulation of the style. I mean, looks pretty, but is it legible? Is it something that you will want to see? I don't know, it will be good to, the screen on the right, for instance, to actually have it in your phone. Is that the right size?
Right.
Is that the right contrast?
Right.
Is everything you have? Like, ask yourself, why do most apps look the way they do? Right? It's
Right.
most likely that the decisions that most of the designers behind, let's say, different email clients go is most likely they test their stuff and they end up looking the way they are.
Right.
Sometimes, I used to do this a lot early in my career, is just trying to break rules seems good or easy, but it's when you understand the rule, then you're able to know when to break it. Like in this
Right.
case, I'm not calling this specifically, but for this project, but I see this in general, like people try to change something because it's very easy to change. It's very easy to press Apple I and things invert. It's very simple to stretch, or it's very simple to change conventions. But sometimes we gloss over like why those conventions were created and what are they trying to solve. I strongly believe that rules are there to set certain boundaries, and sometimes those boundaries don't apply because everything moves. Like the environment, the business, the ecosystem, people, we all change, we're always in motion. So it's good to always challenge those.
Right.
But when you do it in a thoughtful way, that's when you are winning. When you're just doing it because you can,
Right.
without a further exploration or justification of that, and then it becomes a little bit shallow.
Sure.
How important are cover images in the instance of Behance, or even when you're creating, maybe a custom website? That seems like it's like the window into the rest of the, shop, if
Yeah.
you will. What do you kind of look for there?
I think they're super important, right?
Yeah.
It's just if I approach it from the constraints of the medium, right? It's just like if I were seeing it through a book or through an audio tape, the medium has different highlights and lowlights. So in this case, the medium offers, some of the constraints are, each of the chapters in your story has a big image,
Right.
has a little bit of title, probably a little bit of metadata there. Is if you know that as a constraint, and then if you know that most of the target audience you're trying to reach going to scroll really quickly, probably it's in the best intention to have something that is attractive, right? So having an attractive image is a good idea, but I think that's not enough. Because if you see and you browse through the portfolio, all the portfolios, most of them have attractive images, and they all look pretty good, right? So then how do you go the extra level of showing, okay, what else? And this is what I think becomes important. How does your attractive image is solving someone's problem? I think that's what I will articulate. And then it doesn't have to be one image. It can have several images. I don't know if you support it. It could be an animated GIF. It can be many ways to show up ways or facets of the work, right? So a lot of things that helps is showing a simple animation, especially interaction, is super useful. And you don't really know how to be a motion designer. You can just put 3 screens together and stitch them together and export it as a GIF.
Right.
But because what it shows is the mental process that someone will use when looking at that. Right, so Roxanne will probably do this, you will probably do that. And then seeing that and showcasing that is important because
Yeah.
most of that drives, hopefully, your decision making of what you show and what you don't show.
Yeah. On a personal level, I know that your daughter, you get a lot of inspiration from her. Can you talk a little bit more to that? Because I feel like
Yeah.
it's a great sort of story.
I think that ultimately, I think that my goal as a professional is to make technology as easy as possible so people like her are able to use it, like just to make their lives easier. I feel that today, the way you and I and all of us here access technology is a little bit archaic. Like we have tiny screens with tiny, let's say, side menus or arrows. So there's abstraction of what we want to achieve and what we have to go in order to technology to have it, right? So right now, if I want something to move, I have to go through an abstraction of my hand to a touchpad, do certain gestures, and the thing will move. It will be fantastic that I just say move, and the thing moves, right? And that's what I want to achieve, is like the way I talk to you, the way I talk to my daughter, is very simple. We know how to do that because actually we all are born in societies that they teach us how to speak to each other.
Right.
And we adapt to each other all the time. So inspiration from my daughter is how she adapts to me, even though she doesn't understand what I'm saying. It's fascinating to see her stumble, succeed, fail, but each time she does that, she learns and I learn, and we both adapt. My goal is to have technology do the same thing. So it adapts all the time. And you create relationships with technology so that that reference between both of you evolves over time, so then it becomes very simple. So next time I'm here and say, hey, I want to see the portfolio that we're talking about, the dog that got lost, and Joe shows.
Boom.
Right now, I have to open a new tab, open a URL, search for somebody, first of all, I have probably go to my email to see who that person is because I don't remember because my memory is really bad. So I have to go probably 20 steps to find that thing. Imagine how nice it would be to say, oh, that thing of the dog, just as ambiguous as that. And when I talk to my daughter, I'm able to go for something super concrete and specific to something very ambiguous.
Yeah.
And then see how over time she gets it, right? So I'm able to say that, and now she knows what to do, right? So that's what I find inspiration, is how the way she handles, figure things out, is an amazing way to see how we could evolve technology. Because I strongly believe that technology is here to help us solve problems. And if problem solving is easy and engaging as hanging out with a 3-year-old, I think that's winning, right? I think that would be very cool.
Sounds pretty good.
Yeah. Sometimes we'll be probably a little bit hard because
little loud.
You're loud, or you need a little bit of more tolerance than usual. But it's fun. It's more fun.
That's amazing.
Actually, I have a question. You're talking in a few, especially I think with the UI, UX, and interaction design, maybe in different other creative fields. There's a lot of comparison that you can do between this is the way that we used to do this thing, and another app or another thing, and this is the way we did it. Do you think there's some value in sometimes in the description calling out this is the way people are used to doing this, here's how I did it, that kind of thought process of the difference?
Absolutely. Also, because I think every decision has an optimization for, right? So imagine that previous situation or circumstance was affected by certain constraints, right? So the constraints were, I don't know, back then, I'm just going to make up something, just internet was not as fast, or internet was mostly consuming devices that look like that. Now, internet is faster, devices have a tiny screen, or devices actually are further away. Given those constraints changes, my design, my solution is better because blah, 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 right? So that's actually really good. Another strategy is, because there's so many people in the world and there's so much access for information and tools, is instead of trying to solve it for everybody, focus on a few of them. I mean, there's so many that you can even focus on a few will actually have a big impact. And you can say, for people in Ukraine that have this problem in this region, in this time of the month, for these circumstances, this design is best because blah, blah, blah. I think that is great. And then if you're able to do that well, you expand your audience. Okay, now I'm going to also apply it to people in Mexico or to people in Bolivia. And then you're able to articulate the different optimizations that you're doing based on the constraints of each of the demographics or each of the situations. So I think that makes the design very powerful because then it's very rational. It has a lot of rigor, right?
Yeah.
So, and the best way to say it, you can even have a video say, hey, look, I found Roxanne, which matches my demographic. I gave her my stuff, and she was able to complete the task in 1 second, right?
There we did it. Yeah, we did it.
So.
Amazing. Well, thank you so much, Hector, for joining us and sharing your feedback. I know we really appreciate it, and our community members really appreciate it.
Awesome.
So for the audience, if you're just joining us, we are doing a live portfolio review here on behance.net/live. In the comments in the live chat, if you can share your feedback as we go along, make sure to sort of ask some questions there. We'll be fielding them with our reviewer. And the next category we have up is photography. So
yeah,
take it away.
Thank you.
All right, hi there, welcome back. We're with Margo. So Margo's been living and working as an editorial and commercial photographer in San Francisco since 2006. She received her MFA in photography from the Academy of Art and began shooting for magazines, design agencies, tech companies, and dance companies. She's taught photography at AU for 3 years, sat on the San Francisco APA board, and her works appeared in magazines like Surface Magazine, Artsy, San Francisco Magazine, and even our own 99U Quarterly. Quite a resume. Welcome, Margo.
Thank you.
So as you mentioned in your bio, you studied, you've practiced, and even taught photography. When did that start? Like, when did photography start for you? Like, when has it been since day one? Like, your parents handed you a camera and like, go, or is it, what was your progression to that?
Yeah, kind of, actually. I started photography when I was 13 years old, kind of that classic darkroom story. So I had a Canon AE1, and I shot black and white film and made my own processing and worked in the darkroom, and I think that's where I first fell in love with the magic of capturing a moment and the magic of photography. So I've always kind of done it. I never thought it was going to be my career until a little bit later. I went to college for something else. I was
what was that something else?
It was communication. So I was on a more advertising track, which made sense because I studied a lot of media and magazines, and so I kind of was understanding the world that I still work in now, so that was helpful. But yeah, I've always done it as a passion, and I think I was 22 when I moved up to San Francisco to pursue my master's in photography and take it more seriously as a career.
Cool.
Yeah.
Yeah, I've had a lot of friends who, like, in the photography, like, they started with the dark rooms and, like, the stink of the chemicals is sort of, like,
Love
intoxicating that you just, like, get into it.
I love it.
Yeah, it's just, you just keep going back even though you're just like, oh, this is maybe not great for me, but I'm still, maybe still here in the dark room.
Exactly.
So, like, when you're looking at portfolios and things like that, since you have this wide range of, you studied for a long time, you're a practitioner, you've also, like, you're teaching it, are you looking at it as a critical eye? Are you looking at photography as, like, inspiration, all the above? Like, how when you're looking at these things, like, what are you taking in?
Yeah, definitely all of the above. I mean, I think there's the whole range of people shooting just from the heart for more personal fine art projects, and then there are people who want to shoot more commercially and make a living career as a creative artist with it, and then there's everything in between. For me personally, it's a little bit of both. I shoot personally, my own, personal projects that I just love for myself, and then I also exist as a working photographer, so I live in the commercial world as well. So yeah, definitely a little bit of both. Yeah.
Okay. So I asked Mark this at the top, but what was your first portfolio like? Especially as a photographer, it's a little bit easier, but also, like, kind of like Hector said, there are certain restraints to the medium. What was your first portfolio?
Yeah, definitely. My first portfolio was printed, for sure.
Okay.
I still have them, and they collect, and basically just to collect dust in the closet now because there's so much has changed, and so much of it is online now. But I still do have a printed portfolio, and Like Mark said, it's so nice to have that printed piece of paper. I think probably from my love of the darkroom and having my hands on the print, I think I'll always have that love of seeing an image printed on paper.
Right.
So I do still think a printed portfolio is amazing to have and beautiful to show people, and it has a different impact when you show your work that way. So yeah, my first portfolio, gosh, I probably would be so embarrassed to go back and see those images, but I'm sure they're somewhere in my closet collecting dust. Yeah, but it's changed a lot now, and using everything online and social media and Instagram, Facebook. There's so many different platforms with Behance to show your work.
What would you say the role of non-digital photography is? Because we mentioned, the darkroom, versus an Instagram photo.
Yeah.
When you're looking at a portfolio, is it nice to see both? Do you is there a focus there? Or do you see it often anymore?
Yeah, I mean, I think what is most important is the final impact. So whatever the photographer decides to use, if it's digital or film or an 8x10 camera or a Holga plastic camera, whatever it is, it just has to make sense for that person from start to finish. I think the final piece, what you're delivering, whether it's here on Behance or a square image on Instagram or a huge printed piece that's going to be on the wall, it just, I think, has to resonate from start to finish, from the concept to the final piece for each individual photographer. So as long as it makes sense, I think it works.
That's awesome.
Yeah, I think you start getting into problems when people shoot film just for the sake of shooting film.
Sure.
Whereas if it doesn't make sense for that moment or that style, then maybe digital makes more sense or what have you. But yeah, I think shooting film just for the sake of being film, and then you end up transferring it to digital anyways. Yeah, it should just resonate.
Yeah, it reminds me of when a lot of I follow a lot of sports, and there's a certain sport photographers very specific style and how they do everything. And I remember when a lot of newspapers and even ESPN was switching over to full digital years ago, and people were outraged, shooting on film, and they had to be we're digital, we're online, there's, why do the extra process of now processing this film and touching up when we just have the digital file.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, I'll sometimes shoot film, for example, if I'm going on a big trip or if I'm traveling, and for me it's more, I'm slowing down more, and I have a different way of looking through the viewfinder because I know I'm capturing on film instead of shooting a lot of images and constantly looking at the LCD screen. And so it changes the way I am present with the camera. So, depending on where I am or what I'm shooting, usually if I'm traveling or doing a personal project where I really want to slow down and take my time with that one image.
Yeah. That's interesting. And we whenever I would still shoot on film or anything like that, it's like I said, so you get that countdown, you're seeing got 24 left, 20 left. I can't just waste these on whatever. I've got to think about that.
You make
and
it
go
much
for
more
it.
meaningful.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So speaking of which, let's jump into the portfolios. We'll go through some of their. So the first one we have is from Rodney, and he's from Nigeria.
Yeah.
So what are, when you first look at this, what are some things that jump out at you? What are some first initial thoughts?
Yeah, so I really liked a lot of Rodney's work. I'll just do a quick overview and then I'll go back to the top. His portfolio's really diverse. So you'll see from top to bottom, we have a lot of different types of stories in here. And I would love to talk about the ones that really stick out to me.
Yeah.
Because I think there's a certain style that he has in here that he's really good at. And I would totally encourage him to keep shooting in that direction. So that's just a quick overview, and then let me go back to the top here. I'm going to start with this one. So this looks like some work he did for an NGO.
Okay.
And what I see that's really great about his work is he's an amazing storyteller. He has a really great eye for being in the moment. He can capture these images that really give me a sense of time and place, connection to the people that are there. I think people are very comfortable around him I think he's probably very good at interacting with any type of person that he's surrounded by, and that makes for a really beautiful connection with the surrounding and with the people, and it gives him great access to be able to tell us an intimate story. I think he's not afraid to interact with people, and when I look at these images, I really feel like I'm there. I feel very connected. His narratives, it's really personal, and I think this is his strongest talent. So I think he's really great at this. Let me go back to another one. This one really caught my eye as well. Child survivors at an IDP camp. Again, here I really feel like he's really connecting with his subjects, and he has the ability to tell us, to show us stories that we might not be able to see. So he's giving us really intimate access to places and stories that I think are important and beautiful and meaningful. And I just love the way he goes about it. You know, I really feel like he's unafraid. There's no fear here, and the people that are looking at us through his lens are really kind of giving themselves to the camera. And I think that's just a really lovely thing.
Wow.
Yeah, it feels like you're stepping into a different sort of world.
Exactly.
Just even through this screen. It's
Yeah. I think
And especially like through his eyes too. It's not. It's like I feel like the locals' eyes are a lot different than like someone who's traveling in this place, and like the photos that he's taking and the things he's noticing are different than what, you know, if Roxanne went there, if I went there, like what we'd be doing.
Yeah, and that's a really important thing. I think when you're a documentary photographer, it's your goal is to tell a story, and I really feel like just looking at this image, like he is not afraid to just go right up to a person, and you know that person feels comfortable giving their direct eye contact, and they feel really open, and that's just super important for photojournalism, storytelling, editorial kind of photography. So I think this is really lovely. We get a really nice sneak peek glimpse into these stories that he's choosing to tell us. Let's see where else I can go. Even though this story doesn't have any people in it, I feel the same way. I feel like he's really giving us an interesting insider's intimate glimpse into the world around him. And this shows more the urbanization and the changing landscape and the architecture.
These are great. These are really beautiful.
Yeah. So these are the ones that definitely stuck out to me. I feel like he's really in the moment, and I feel like just him walking through his surroundings, he has a really keen eye to pick up on these things.
When you're looking at a photography portfolio, how important is text?
Yeah, that's a great question. Actually, I'm glad you brought that up because he does write a lot in his portfolio, and I think he has a really beautiful way with words. I think it's important enough. It just depends on the story. It depends on the photographer, and if text makes sense, then by all means, go ahead and add it. And I did read the text that he has attached to his images, and they're really beautiful. Actually, they really draw me in. I think his words also add an amazing narrative to his images. So I think he's one of those photographers that could write as well. And actually, in some cases, I can show you a couple other portfolios where I felt like I read his words and they really drew me in. But actually, the photos didn't live up to the story,
Didn't
but
do
the
it justice,
words, told me. So in those cases, sometimes I wanted more from the images. But in general, I think his writing is very eloquent and beautiful.
So like a lot of the work that he's showing, so he's doing, some landscape, portraiture, like even like architecture, like architectural photos. We talked about this with our last two guests, that having the breadth, but then also like the depth, like how is that different with photography? Because, you can see these images and you're drawn in and they're great, but like how is it different than, you know, graphic design or interaction design in this case?
Yeah, I'd say actually the same thing that totally resonates for photography as well. Editing is just as much a part of your role as taking the pictures, and if you overwhelm your viewer with too many images, it can oversaturate the experience. So I think less is more, and you do definitely want more depth than breadth. And I think that's something all photographers struggle with. It's hard to separate yourself from your own work, and you want to show everything that you've done. But over time, the more you shoot, you narrow it down to your more core work, and it has more impact that way. So I think it's always good to show your work and to other sets of eyes, to bounce your feelings off of them, and you know what doesn't resonate, maybe it's time to let it go.
Right.
Can be the hardest thing,
Yeah.
hardest part. Yeah.
I think he's also, the situations he's working in, I think he has a lot of really hard light that he's working with. Broad daylight, bright sun, really harsh conditions. So if anything, I think I could see room for improvement in terms of maybe making tighter compositions, you know, really narrowing in on the subject, or playing around with different depth of field, maybe using a shallower depth of field so we're just seeing the eyes and everything else kind of falls out of focus. Maybe that doesn't work for him, but just playing around, you know, it looks like a lot of the images are at a really high f-stop, so everything's really sharp in focus. And for some people, that's the style that they really love, but I would just encourage him to play around. Maybe there's something that can make the images feel a little bit tighter. And also just looking for light, moving yourself around with the direction of the sun. I mean, obviously he's not going to come in and bring strobe lights and produce shoots.
He's like, gets distracted, like, hold on, let me let me get this set up again.
Right. I think for him, ambient light is the way to go. But sometimes even just finding open shade versus, you know, bright sunlight, or standing next to a white wall where there's a little bit of bounce. There are ways to kind of play around that I think would be great too. But yeah, just like I said before, I feel really connected to these places. I feel like I'm there, and I think that's a really great skill to have as a photojournalist.
Yeah, that you're there, that you're seeing what that person's seeing, or the perspective of the people that you're trying to capture in this way.
Exactly. It's a really kind of humble eye with very little pretense, I think. The other work, so he has, when I say he has a mixed portfolio, then he has also some studio work and some more surreal work that I think can be really fun, and maybe he explores it and develops a whole other kind of side project. But to me, this feels like a very different photographer, and it could be, you know, interesting if he really developed it and put a lot of energy into it and then narrowed it down and edited it to something new. But what really resonates for me is more of the documentary, photojournalistic work. This feels, you know, the more surreal, composited work. It can be fun, and I'm sure people have a lot of fun with it. But where I think he really stands out, and I think his heart is in also, is the documentary work.
You can sort of, it's interesting because you can see the progression, right? Like, you know, these are sort of further down in the portfolio, sort of indicating that this might have been, you know, his focus at that time, and you can see at the top that's where he's headed, and so you can really, it's almost like a timeline in a sense, which is cool.
Yeah, he has a bit of food photography in here too, and I totally get it. You know, we all you know, we have to work, so we get jobs and whatnot, but again, it feels like such a different person. So I think if he, maybe it belongs on a different site that's more of his commercial work, or he has a fine art site, or, you know, the more surrealistic work, studio portraits. But when I see it mixed together with the documentary work, it feels like two very different photographers.
Yeah, I think that's a good point to bring up, because, you know, if you're looking, depending on what he wants to keep doing, like, kind of like what you said is, like, if you keep going further down, it gets a little more muddled. You're like, you know, there's certain things that, you know, pay the bills, and like there's like certain things that like you put up there because like, oh, I can do like this studio work, or I can do this
Right.
like this very commercial work. But like you even start to see things like this where it's even further down, but you're just like, yeah, this is interesting. Like this, like
Exactly.
bumping up the things that you want to keep doing, or
Right.
that like you even know that like, yeah, I'm good at this. Like I'm good at like this thing. This is my thing.
Right. There is one more project maybe we could talk about that's
Yeah.
up here on the top, and I feel like it's probably one of his more recent works.
That stood out for me.
Yeah, and the writing is great. I'd suggest, recommend people to go back and have a read because, yeah, it gives you an eye into the meaning behind it for him. So this actually feels like a really different a photographer, also from the documentary work that I love of his. But I actually think there's something great within it, and I do think it's kind of a different direction from the photojournalistic work, but I think it's really interesting and I think it's fun, and I think here he's taken the surreal work that we saw earlier on his portfolio to a different level. And it's fun and it's kind of funky and funny and sexy and racy and powerful, and it's all about the meaning behind a woman's hair and how different it is, long and short, and the societal meaning we give to it. And there's humor in it, and it's colorful and poppy, which again, so different from his other work.
Yeah.
But I wouldn't mind seeing him explore more of this.
Try that a little more. Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's awesome.
And he's like, and but it's different with this. I feel like some of the other studios work. He's back outside. Like he's
That's
like
true.
he's doing like some of
Yeah.
these things like out again.
That's right.
And there's only one subject.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's great.
So, and I'm sure this subject loves these images, right? I'm sure, he captured something really fun. So this might be something new that he's kind of caught on to.
Yeah, or like
and
stumbled into like yeah,
Yeah.
okay, like I can do this.
Yeah.
That's cool.
I feel like he's probably really excited about it, so I'd say go for it.
That's cool.
Yeah.
So let's look at our next portfolio that we have up.
Okay.
And we can always go back to some of these, but let's look at the next one.
Right.
So this is Hulo or Julo, sorry, from the Philippines. Kind of the same thing. Like, what's the first impression? Because I think that's where I think if we keep reiterating like what our portfolio is, like it's that first impression. So
Yeah.
what's your first take on this?
Sure.
The hot take.
Yes. So I'll do another quick scroll so everyone can just get a fast overview. My first impressions were fun, funky, very colorful. He has a sense of humor. There's a lot of irony in his work. I feel like he could have some more commercial options with his work in terms of having clients that have products or fashion or something along those lines.
So did you say that even if it's not how we're talking about with Mark, like a real project versus like let's say passion project, but
Right.
that has that like commercial feel to it or that commercial like shine, kind of putting that in there might help, or like go into that a little bit more.
Yeah, I feel, and we'll probably see some good examples of it as we go through his work. Even if they aren't actual advertising or marketing shoots, I think the right kind of client could see this and see the potential.
Got it.
As long as it aligns with their aesthetic and their
Sure.
style and their audience. To me, I see him fitting in with kind of a younger, edgier, hipper crowd. I'd want to say something almost like an American Apparel type of, like
I was
not
gonna say, like,
overly.
Glossier, like that,
Right.
or some sort of like you know,
Exactly. Yeah.
Yeah.
I wouldn't put him with like an overly sophisticated or an overly chic or overly produced kind of aesthetic.
Yeah.
But I think that's part of his appeal. I think you got to do what speaks to you and what you do best. And I think for him, it's a little bit more of the quirky,
Yeah.
ironic,
And color.
fun and poppy, and
Oh wow.
he has a lot of these cinemagraphs, so there's a lot of movement, and they're just really kind of silly, not in a bad way, but they're very lighthearted, and I think one of his best talents is playing with color.
Yeah.
they're just
I
really
remember that one.
simple.
That was
It's
fun.
nothing overly complicated, but he just takes something and has fun with it, and you know,
Yeah.
sometimes that's all you need. You don't need to overproduce or
Yeah.
overcomplicate it. If it's good and funny to you, then
Yeah. I think this
Then go
also
for
kind of
it.
talks to, we saw the last photography we looked at worlds different from like the
Yes.
work that's there.
Right.
But there's nothing better or worse for what you're trying to do. Like to be a serious photographer doesn't mean you have to go like to like middle of nowhere and like take these like really like heavy shots. Like you
Exactly.
can do something like this and it's like it's showing skill, it's like it's having fun, but it's completely different.
Exactly. Yeah. I think you just have to stick to your gut, and if it feels right for you, then you know it's probably going to resonate to a client or
Yeah.
an audience or a viewer. Like this, like who does this?
Not safe for work.
Right.
Oh, that's awesome. So much movement.
I like that. Yeah. The movement's
Yeah.
really great.
And I mean, it's not really like telling us like some grand worldly story, you know. It's just it is what it is.
Yeah.
It's just a little bit more surface level and humorous and fun. If anything, for an improvement, I'd say I'd love to see him work on his lighting style. I think he can make it a little bit more refined.
Okay.
Looks like he's shooting these in the studio. I think he could play around, you know, there's such a big world of studio lighting. I think he could really play around and have a lot of fun, and shaping the light differently, playing with a hard light, a soft light. I think there's a lot of room to play for him there.
Yeah, because these are very similar. Like each one is like studio setup. Like
Yeah.
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 These are great though. The color
Yeah.
is really wonderful.
And I think what he's good at is taking an image and doing something with it at the next step. So they're not necessarily straight images. So I think the image right out of camera, maybe I think the way he thinks, he sees an image and he wants to add layers to it. So
Okay.
making it a cinematograph, or, you know, he plays a lot with composites and, let me find another. This was actually my favorite of his work. My favorite portfolio he had, because I think it takes the work with the color and the cinemagraphs, but it adds one more little twist to it that to me is like a little bit, there's like a little bit of sexiness in it, and so it's just adding that one more layer. I don't know, to me this has a feeling. It's humorous, there's texture, you know, there's kind of a visceral feeling, like I can feel what that would feel like to scrunch up that flower,
Yeah.
and the play with color.
The back scratch.
Yeah, I mean, we all know what that feels like.
Yeah. Like, oh yeah.
Yes, exactly,
Sweet relief.
exactly.
Oh wow.
So, you know, I think he has
Yeah.
a quirky train of thought.
Yeah.
And I think that's his strong point.
And it's interesting. At the top, he had the photos as stills, and like those worked on their own. But it's like it's that next step when you go in, you're like, oh, it's like she's actually like moving. Like
Exactly.
It's like blurring that line of like video and still image. But I feel like it works either way.
Mm-hmm. There we have it as a still.
Yeah.
And then, yeah, some of these in here, I feel I'm more drawn to the earlier ones.
Uh huh.
I feel like there are some of in here that he's maybe evolved past. Again, when we go further down into the portfolio, we kind of see the more beginning work. So this, for example, is maybe like where he would just take a straight image, and then I feel like as he's evolved, he's thinking of how he can take that image to a different place.
Sure.
It's really interesting to see his work and how, like you're saying, it's blurring that line of video and movement and still. And, you know, I think for some of the work that's really successful, like if it only existed like on the internet, like that's where it works. Like you wouldn't be able to
Right.
print a lot of these, but it's like that's the world we're in now, where it's like you can go to, you go to like NewYorkTimes.com and like they have these like cinemographs, so like they're getting, they're moving towards that kind of thing. And it's like, I think this has opened up a whole other world of photography. Like it's that weird gray space of still and moving.
Definitely.
And actually, a question I had to go along with that, you hear nowadays like everyone's a photographer, right? Instagram sort of creates that environment. Like how do you think that sort of impacted the photography world at large? Do you feel it's beneficial, sort of scary, a little bit of both?
Yeah, I think that has definitely affected the photography world. I mean, everybody has a camera now, and everybody has also a camera in their back pocket. It's just too easy now to pull out a great quality camera and
The
just
best camera that we've
use
ever
your
had,
thumb and it's gotten so sophisticated that you really don't have to even have a understanding of what's going on with light or the physics of the camera or f-stop or shutter speed or any of that. So I think that does pose a little bit of a challenge to photographers. But I also feel optimistic that there will always be people that will appreciate the depth of those that do understand
Sort of the craft.
the craft behind it. And we all do that. I have an iPhone in my back pocket and I pull it out to snap photos throughout my day. And for me, those are more superficial memories, just as momentary keepsakes. But I don't cherish them in the same way that I do my own photographs or other photographers' photographs that inspire me and I admire. And I know they didn't just, point and shoot that, but there's more thought or there's more feeling behind it. So I do think there will always be people that will appreciate both. There's a place for both.
I think it's a great point. Like you said, there's always going to be people who like not only just appreciate the output, but then the people, you're given, for the last 100 and some odd years, like getting to a camera has been pretty easy. Like it's a low barrier to sort of like get into, and like even easier now for our generations, like growing up. But I noticed this like even like growing up, like my friends who like everyone's like a photographer, and then like it kind of like falls off. But there are people who just like keep going to like the next level. They're just like, oh, this is interesting. Like I want to know more about this, and it's like so it's
formal
like
education on it.
that like and you've probably seen that. It's just like I like took photos when I was a teenager, but like I don't do that anymore. It's like but they're the people who are like, no, I started and now I'm like I know everything about what I need to like know. That there's always those craftspeople in that world. So
Definitely.
It's like we see that I think on Behance in a lot of creative fields that you have sort of like the old guard that are just like, oh, this kid, and it's like no, it's like they're the people that are going to stick with it and that like are being successful, still produce great work. It might be done a little bit differently, but it's still like of that caliber.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, I still have people that will ask me, to give them like a little lesson on how to shoot their cameras in manual mode and just understand what f-stop and shutter speed and ISO are. And it's really just those basic three things. That's all you need to know. And the excitement that people get when it clicks and they understand how to manipulate it and look at an image and see what they want to change about it and actually change it. I think that excitement will never die.
I think for the like now we've seen it even in phones things. When I first wanted to learn how like depth of field and like I learned like how to do that, I was like, oh, that was awesome. Like, I figured that out. Like it's like a formula of like how to do it.
Right.
And there was just something great about that I don't who knows, like I don't see that dying at any point. Like
and then there's the technical side of it, and that's one thing to understand and to love and enjoy. But then I think what really makes impact for people or makes images memorable is the emotional content in it and the aesthetic and the concept. And knowing f-stop and shutter speed is one thing, but are you putting your heart in the image and what is in the image? What are we looking at? Does it have impact? Does it resonate? Does it last? What do you remember 1 week later?
Yeah.
When you're looking at a portfolio, how important is it for a creative to list the sort of tools used? So maybe it's the camera model, or maybe even more specifically like the editing tool, Lightroom, this and that, or does it sort of just, is it all about that final piece and it doesn't matter how you kind of got there?
Yeah, to me, it doesn't matter. I think get there however you need to get there. Like I said earlier, if you want to use a plastic camera or an 8x10 film camera, that's whatever floats your boat.
Okay, cool.
Whatever you like. there's every type of camera, every type of camera has its own use. So I think whatever resonates for that artist, that creative, that photographer, as long as it makes sense for that person, I think it makes the most sense. So I'm not too hung up on, what model of camera or how old it is or how many megapixels it can capture. I think none of that matters. It's really like, what are you creating? What does it look like? What's the emotional content in it? And it's all about communication. What are you capturing?
Sure.
Yeah.
Yeah, I feel like there's a weird sub-user of photographers where it's all about the gear.
Totally.
I've got this, I got this, and it's and you look at the images that are coming on, you're like,
right.
Might not matter.
Doesn't
you should
matter.
maybe return it. You just get a plastic Loma Loma camera instead.
Exactly. I always love that when I'm shooting and people come up to me and
what
ask
are
me
you
about my
using?
gear, and we'll do a little gear talk, and it's like, or they'll come up to me and say, "Wow, you're doing a great job," based on the gear I'm holding. It's like, you haven't even seen my images.
I rented this, so I don't even know it. I just been
Impressive
carrying
camera
it.
strap.
It's just
No battery in
it's
this
just a
camera.
machine,
Yeah.
the creativity comes from the person
Yeah.
holding it.
Yeah.
Cool.
Yeah, I think it's a
Yeah.
great thing. It's a tool, and
It's a tool.
yeah, it's
Yeah.
someone can use that tool great, or just
Right.
all thumbs don't know what to do with that.
Exactly.
Should we pop over to the last?
Sure.
We have one more.
Cool. So this is so we looked up this name because none of us are very fluent in Bulgarian.
Sorry
But
about that.
sorry, but very different photography from what we've seen before. Sort of same thing. What hit you? What's what's
Yeah.
there?
So this photographer, what strikes me right away, and I'll just do a quick scroll
Sure.
through his portfolio. He has a really graphic eye for composition, this is definitely his strong point. His compositions are really clean, really graphically composed, very formal, minimal, and I love that about his work. I think that's his talent. That's where his eye really is strong, and I think he should stick to that. So he has a lot of landscapes. I'll take you through this portfolio, and you'll see they're just really clean, minimal compositions. His use of lines, symmetry, negative space,
Wow.
whether it's very symmetrical with, this is rule of thirds couldn't be more evident here. This is rule of thirds 101. So that's great. Here again, you have rule of thirds, and then bam, something right in the center. So graphically, I think he's almost working like a graphic designer with his camera. And I think that's great.
Yeah, a lot of work with balance and things like that too. In there too, it's great.
And I think he's good at making these collections of work. Like here, we almost have, it's just this collection of these homes. And here we can see very wintry images that feel really melancholic to me. They feel so cold, and you really get a sense of that. The black and white, they're almost very sad and somber. Not a place I'm dying to visit right now.
Right at that time.
We're not in this moment. But I think he captures them, he really captures an emotion of this place, which is cold and dark and somber, and you don't see a lot of life or movement. It's kind of desolate. And I think some of these would make really beautiful prints, because they're kind of, the way he makes compositions, they're very easy on the eyes.
Yeah. Even if the subject isn't the easiest thing, it's it's pleasing. It's visually pleasing still.
Definitely. I mean, photography doesn't all have to be happy.
Yeah.
It's it's capturing something, it's capturing a feeling, so that's great.
It's sort of telling a story in a sense.
Yeah,
You're traveling along with that person.
exactly.
Mhm.
Yeah, he is a good storyteller as well.
Wow.
Yeah,
Just like gets you.
Burr.
right. You know, such a great example of a frame within a frame.
Yeah.
That's really pretty.
Yeah. So it's like those basic composition tools you learn in like your first photography class. Like they actually never lose their power.
Yeah.
So the clean compositions,
Foundations,
rule of
yep.
thirds, graphic elements in the images. I think he's just taking that and running with it throughout, which is great. There are some great ones in here that I love. A bit more on the urban side.
Yeah.
But just the way that he organizes buildings and finds details, I think simplicity is key here, and he's onto that.
Yeah. And I think it's like an interesting thing to point out is, we've looked at very different photographers, like we said, going through that, he's doing a lot of like landscape and like architecture and sort of like the, mostly like landscape kind of things. And, that's like, it's great photography, but it's not the only photography. I think you always have to like remember that it's like there are different styles and like there are different things you can be doing, and like this is amazing, but not everyone's photography has to be this. It's like
Exactly.
there are, as evidenced by what we've seen so far, like there's such a wide gamut of what you could be doing with the camera.
Exactly. And the few times where I see him actually photographing people, he's really just using them as graphic elements within the frame. So they're almost just part of the architecture.
That's great.
This image reminds me very much of Henri Cartier-Bresson, that decisive moment where
Yeah.
the person and their shadow fits exactly in the composition where it needs to, and he just captured it at that right moment.
Yeah, that's a good way to put it, that even the people that you see in it, they're just elements within it. They're not the focus of
Exactly. Yeah, so I wouldn't go on to recommend that he, shoots portraits
Yeah.
of people. I think he's pretty clear on what he likes to shoot, and
Yeah.
I think that's important. Even here, I think that's a really beautiful use of light and shadow and just such a clean composition. It feels really, really settled.
Yeah. It almost has a painting-esque element to it.
It
Yeah.
does. I think that would make a really beautiful print.
Yeah. Yeah, kind of like harkens back to some of the, I feel like the older, like very older photography where it's like it was emulating painting in that way of like, this is what the vanguard was then, like of these images that you would hang up is like a paint. It looks like a painting, and like compared to the last portfolio we're looking at, which like no, like the moving thing is like not a painting that you're going to be
Exactly.
hanging up anytime soon.
Yeah, and I think this is just a good example of, you don't have to show too much. You don't always have to show every detail in an image. Sometimes, holding back and being more minimal and being more subdued can have more impact. It's almost in what you're not showing. It gives more mystery and allure.
Question for you, Margo,
Yeah.
actually. When you were first starting out and really trying to make this a professional thing that you're going to sort of like make a living off of, how did you just sort of like say yes to every project that came along? How did you sort of, did you say no? What did you say no to? I know a lot of times people will, to Mark's point, will just sort of like work for free if they're just getting started to kind of learn the tricks of the trade. What was that like for you?
Yeah, that's a great question. Yeah, the beginning is hard.
Yeah.
It's hard, and making the transition from being a student to being a working professional, a working creative, a working photographer, it's a hustle.
Yeah.
And I think it always will be a hustle, so I think you have to be prepared for that and be prepared to go with the ups and downs of it. A piece of advice I always give is, I'm so glad you asked me the question that way, is to say yes. And I think I did that a lot in the beginning, because the more you shoot, the more you experiment, the more you try, the better and the faster you're going to get to that point where you have a solid portfolio and you know who you are as a photographer and you have a vision and an eye that speaks to who you are. You're not going to get there by holding back or by sitting in your apartment. You know,
or saying no to things because you're being picky.
Yeah, no, I don't want to do that. Yeah, no, yeah.
So yeah, I think saying yes is a great piece of advice. Until you figure out, nope, that I'm not a food photographer. I'm, you know, I'm not documentary. I'm not landscapes. Like, it takes a while to figure out.
Today. Yeah.
Right, right. Maybe try out a few weddings.
Yeah, sure.
Figure out, you know, until you figure out what's not for you.
And I'm sure you meet so many people along the way that even if they're not necessarily in that area you want to go into, they know people in the field that will. So you know, you get recommendations, you get referred. I'm sure it just sort of spirals from there.
Yeah, I think that's the thing is there are going to be so many types of jobs out there that aren't for you, but you really can't know it until you've tried it out, or you have to kind of dip your hand in every pot before you figure out which one you're going to be eating.
I think that like kind of talks to the point that we had earlier on with Mark when it's like it's, you know, maybe you're not showing all those things that you're always doing.
Oh yeah.
But it's like
don't
it's
show
important.
Those.
But it's like important that like you're doing the work, and I think a lot of people have it's kind of like the social media thing is like what you're showing is like everything that like you're working on. It's like no, there's like a lot of failures in those too. Like there's a lot of like works in progress that you're just like no one needs to see this. Like you like.
But it's valuable.
But it's still valuable. Like I don't think I think there's sometimes a disconnect between what you're showing and then like what you're doing. It's like you know some people are just like I show everything, so it's like here it is, and then others like I don't show anything at all. Like so I think like finding the balance that you're comfortable with is important too.
Exactly. Yeah, and that's the beauty in being your own editor is you get to present yourself and have to present yourself the way you want. And if you know if a job didn't resonate or if it wasn't your best work, don't show it.
Yeah.
Keep it on the hard drive. Nobody needs to see that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Be selective. Yeah.
Exactly.
That's
But
really
I think saying yes and getting as much work and experience under your belt until you have the ability to say no is a great way to go. And then once you get to the point where you're able to confidently say no to a job, that's just such an awesome place to be.
I think we hear that a lot from creatives that we talk to, that like they get to a certain point that, you know, they say, for like years and years and years, it was just like the hustle and just like oh my gosh, like just like, you know, doing everything, like doing things I never thought I was going to be doing anyway. And then at a point you're just like, no, I'm here. I can say like I'm gonna like do something I like, or that, you know, I don't have to worry about this.
Yeah. The point you can say no to a job because you know who you are as a photographer and you know that that's not the right fit for you, or you know your time could be better spent working on things that do make sense for you. I think you've reached a level of self-awareness. That's great.
Yeah, and we've both got friends like in industries. I think especially like in film, I've had friends that like, you know, they got to a point where they just like couldn't take on more work, and like making connections with everyone, it helps, because like, you know, I might not be able to do this or don't want to, but like I know someone who does. So like kind of like don't stay in your house and like just like work on Photoshop, like get out there, like meet people.
Exactly.
You know, we do these portfolio review events that like you can meet those people, and that like hopefully it fosters something that, you know, down the road, Margo, like you don't want to do this thing, but like I know someone who does, and let's talk to them.
Oh, that part is so important, because you're working as an individual, you're working, really working alone. So it's so valuable to have a community, and I mean that happens all the time between me and my photography colleagues. You know, we'll pass jobs to each other, and you know, if it doesn't feel like a right fit for me, I'll pass it to a friend, and you know, we're doing that all the time. So. Yeah, it's important to be present and out in the world and keep good connections with people in your community.
Yeah, I think that's like a skill that we tend to forget about from time to time, or even when we're talking to like our members, it's like it's something that we forget every once in a while, but we're like, no, that's how it happens. Like, so you know, there's we talked to some folks who it's that 1 in a million shot where like they got found and like they made their mark with like this particular thing, but that's like lightning in a bottle. Like it's sometimes, you know, it's years of just like grinding and like meeting people and like doing all this stuff, and then like you start to build it up gradually. Like that one shot like sort of doesn't happen as often as we might want to think it does.
Yeah, exactly.
Another question I had, just thinking,
So I'm sure you have your own portfolio with your work in it. How often do you find yourself updating that, or more so, what would your advice be to someone who has they have consistent projects and that they're very proud of? They want to showcase that, but you don't want to like update everything all at once. So what's the frequency like there for you? And
yeah, I think that's personally, it's a really challenging thing for me because just, you keep shooting all the time and updating the printed portfolio is kind of, it's such a big project.
Sure. Yeah.
So I'll be very honest with you.
Yeah.
I have a printed portfolio that I love, but it's not up to date as of now.
Right.
The only thing that's up to date is like my website and my online presence.
Right.
It's
a lower
social
barrier
media.
to-
And yeah, because those things are just so easy to,
Right.
I do a shoot, I get final images and I just throw them up there and it's instant. But to get the prints, match them the right size, make sure the color matches, get the 3 holes punched, reorder the thing, put it in the
Yeah.
thing, and then,
The whole
it's,
project.
so that
right.
happens like occasionally, updating the printed portfolio.
But it makes sense because the people who are looking at your work, they're not
Yeah.
like knocking on your door like, hey, can I see your work? It's like no
Yeah.
one does that. Like they're gonna Google your name and like your
Right.
website comes up. So it's like you have to think of what platform or what medium is important to you, and like
Right.
usually, unfortunately, the physical ones like tend to go to the bottom.
Yeah.
It does, and it's not to say that it's not important, and it's actually something like on my to-do list,
Right.
to update.
Sure.
Yeah.
I'm being very honest. But definitely the bulk of my work, I think people find me through my website or, whatever is online, and they don't always have time either to look at my printed portfolio or, call it in or whatnot. So definitely your website and whatever you're using online, super important.
Right.
It's timely. You can do it in a second, so there's no excuse
Right.
there.
Right.
Printed portfolio, I think it's great to have. I love having it in print. For me personally, I get asked for it a lot less, but definitely not to be overlooked.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's interesting because we always say, your portfolio is a living, breathing document, and
Yeah.
I think sometimes people sort of just forget that, allocating a certain amount of time, even if it's just on the web to update it, is just so important.
Oh yeah,
Because
you have to.
yeah, you have to. I mean, there's nothing better than going to someone's, Behance profile or website, seeing something new from the last time you
Yeah.
visited, and
Yeah.
it really shows momentum. It shows commitment. And so, yeah, we always try and like recommend to our users to do like scheduled like portfolio, almost like spring cleaning, where it's
Absolutely.
like same thing when you like have to do home improvement or like clean your house.
Yeah.
Like, you have
Clean
to
the
update
gutters,
that
like up your
portfolio.
Spring cleaning on the portfolio.
Yeah.
It's
Yeah.
very true.
So
Yeah, I also wouldn't underestimate or overlook smaller printed pieces, like, promo materials, postcards, even, business cards, booklets, even if it's just highlighting maybe your most recent work or a few of your favorite images or, some
a great
top
point.
pieces from your portfolio that don't necessarily have to be the portfolio of all the best images of your life. But hey, I just did this one recent series with 5 or 10 images
Yeah.
in it, and get creative with the way you print it or fold it up or box it up.
That's
Then you
cool.
have a tangible
Yeah.
piece that's not necessarily that very traditional portfolio.
sure, it's a different way to sort of promote and market it yourself.
Yeah,
Yeah.
No, we have so many tools and options for
Yeah.
creating printed pieces now that you can
Yeah.
have a lot of fun with.
Yeah, I think that's like especially for our creative, like the younger creatives that we talk to that are getting out, it's the self-marketing can almost feel like kind of icky. Like they're just like, it's not something like, I'm not good at it.
Doesn't
Like
come
it
naturally
doesn't
to
come
people,
naturally
yeah.
and like things like that. So I think, what you said is like, finding those pathways that are comfortable to you, whether it's like your printed work that you just like are giving to people, or it's like online, or, it's going to events, like just, it's important, because the work just doesn't sometimes speak for itself. They need to meet the person who's doing it.
Exactly. Yeah.
Awesome.
Awesome. Any other closing things you want to go over with the portfolios?
Let's see. I don't know if that was the last image there. That's good. Yeah, I would just say with the
Or just
portfolios,
in general,
yeah. I feel like all these 3 photographers, each of them has something really of the core of themselves in their work. And it's sometimes alongside work that feels like another photographer. So I think they all have something great in there, and I think it's just about finding out what the core is, and they know, it's the work that resonates with you most.
Yeah.
Keep shooting that, and you can narrow it down to just that and let go of the other stuff so that your portfolio feels really has a strong, consistent, cohesive message, and that's you as your aesthetic as a photographer.
Awesome.
Yeah.
Thank you so much.
Thank you so
Yeah,
much. This
thank
is so
you.
wonderful. I
Thank
hope
you.
everyone viewing at home got something out of that. That was
Yeah.
really great. So speaking of which, if you're actually just joining us now, this is Behance Portfolio Review Live. So we've got one more coming up, but if you are on YouTube, you can actually go to behance.net/live. We have a comment stream on the website. And then also, if you're joining us if you want to share what you're doing on Twitter, you can hashtag Behance Live and join the conversation there. And again, thanks, Margo.
Thank you.
So our next category is going to be illustration, and joining us is Nathan Goldman, creative director of DKNG Studios. So let's go ahead and meet him. Hey everyone, we're back with Nathan Goldman of DKNG Studios. Hey Nathan, how's it going?
Good, thanks for having me.
Thanks for joining us. So Nathan initially joined Artistic Forces with future DKNG partner Dan Culkin. Did I say that right?
You did.
Okay, in high school, where they designed album artwork and collateral for the rock band, which they both performed in. Prior to joining DKNG as a full-time creative director, Nathan served as the director of design at the USC Design Studio, during which time Nathan and Dan began collaborating on rock posters for the legendary Troubadour, did I say that right? Los Angeles. DKNG has found a niche in linking a personal and unique aesthetic to the world's most talented and iconic musical artists, brands and businesses. I'm sure you guys have heard of some of these. The Black Eyed Peas, not the Black Keys, a little different. Eric Clapton, Jack White, Hyundai, Disney, Paramount Pictures, HBO, Marvel Comics, Outside Lands Music Festival, MTV, and so much more. So welcome. We're really excited to have you.
Thanks.
So Nathan, tell me a little bit more about yourself and what you've been up to as of late.
Yeah, well, like you were saying, we kind of got our start in the music industry, but lately we still keep one foot in that world, but then we also have been doing a lot of commercial artwork lately. So working with anything from beer packaging for like Almanac Beer Company is something we have a lot of fun with recently. Editorial design, branding projects for companies like Cliff Bar and USA Today. But then we still get to do some music stuff, like we just did a poster for Radiohead at the Greek Theater. So
That was
yeah.
awesome when I saw that. That was great.
Oh, thanks. So yeah, it's kind of a fun, diverse group of projects right now.
Yeah. So, you've worked with these sort of like major brands. How do you decide which ones you're going to dive into and which ones you kind of have to take a pass on?
I mean, there's a lot of things we consider, but I'd say it comes down to you know, is it something that we're passionate about? And then do the logistics of the project line up as far as, you know, the music industry is notorious for last minute things. And, you know, we get calls all the time and saying, we're having a festival this weekend, can you make the poster?
Oh
and
my
it's like,
goodness.
you know, did you not know it was going to happen? Or, you know, so sometimes depending on the circumstances, we can't take everything on.
Right.
But yeah, if it's something that we're excited about and, you know, maybe it's taking us in a new direction that we haven't tried before and we want to experiment with a new medium or a new type of client, you know, we pretty much try to do what we can and also keep different types of projects going at the
Right.
same time. So we try to also prioritize kind of in-house personal projects that we want to do or add something to our product line or our online store, while maybe we're also working on a music project and also working on a commercial branding type thing. So just trying to keep it diverse.
And how long have you and Dan sort of worked together?
So I guess our first collaboration was when we were about 15 years old,
Wow.
when we started playing in this band together. And thanks for not using those photos as our backdrop today.
Oh, they're coming later.
Yeah,
Oh, great.
They'll be there.
But yeah, it was just, you know, I had always been into graphic design since I was a little kid. My aunt worked in textile design for, you know, companies like Calvin Klein in New York, and I had always followed in her footsteps and started using Corel Draw when I was 6 years old, and just always was interested. But so then Dan had always had a fine art background. We grew up in San Diego. He would go to the zoo and just sit there for hours illustrating all the animals at the zoo.
That's really cool.
But then when we were 15, we started playing in this band together and just playing little house parties and things around San Diego. But we would start making our own album artwork and flyers for shows, and it was just for fun. You know, I would contribute typography and design, and he would contribute some of his illustrations. And we didn't really think that could be a career until much later on, when we were both in college in LA, and a few opportunities came up, such as the Troubadour, being able to do concert posters for them. And that was kind of the beginning of our professional collaboration. So I guess that was about 12 or so years ago now. Wow.
And so, you know, you're such a sort of like dynamic duo, the two of you. Are there certain things that you sort of say, that's my, you know, frontier, or do you really collaborate from the ground up? Do you have specialties?
We do. We're totally different people, both personality-wise and also as far as our skill sets.
Yeah.
And I think if we were more similar, we'd just be butting heads constantly. But we do, it took us a long time to figure out kind of who should be doing what, and even just talking back and forth and realizing, oh, you're managing that part of the business, that really should be me, and kind of passing things back and forth. But yeah, now both on the creative side of the business and kind of the managerial operational side, we each have our own, you know, things that we're best at and that we stick to and support each other. But when it comes to the creative work, almost every project is very collaborative. We literally pass a file back and forth in Dropbox and spy on each other and say, are you sure you want to put that person in that part of the competition, in that part of the
I'm watching
composition?
you.
I wouldn't do it that way.
But I think we've gotten to a point where we can already kind of foresee what the other person's feedback is going to be. And so it's like, before you say anything, I know
I
this
know, you're
person's
gonna hate
nose is too
this.
big and we need to change it. So
That's funny.
Yeah,
You've
we-
kind of found your groove.
yeah,
with
we
each
have kind
other.
of a shorthand.
Yeah. And so when you were sort of starting out and doing these music posters, was there a moment where you decided to share your work on a portfolio site? Do you remember sort of that moment where you're like, I need to really put myself out there with the stuff I've been doing?
Yeah, and I think that's also where our different personalities came in handy, because I think that I tend to be a bit more conservative about, let's wait till the right moment to show our work, and maybe we're not ready. And I think Dan was a little bit more of the mindset of, you know, what we're doing is good, and let's try putting it out there. And I think one of the first times we actually showed our work was in person at South by Southwest. There's this flat stock gig poster festival that we attend every year, and we got a booth, and we had no idea what we were doing. We had these little 11 by 17 digital posters, and everyone else has these beautiful large format screen printed posters. And as soon as we set up our booth, I felt like I was going to cry because it was so intimidating. But it was a great learning experience being there and just getting information from other designers and learning about their printing process. And then from there, I think, you know, we started building a website pretty early on. We were lucky that, you know, even in the days before, you know, easy ways to share your work like Behance, My brother knew some web design, some coding, and helped us kind of put together a rudimentary website. And I think eBay was the first place we ever sold any of our
my
posters.
gosh,
So
incredible.
yeah, it was.
Had to
It
use
was
PayPal, I'm sure.
Yeah.
Only PayPal.
yeah, so it was pretty bare bones at the beginning, and just kind of a slow burn to start putting our
Yeah.
work out there.
Cool. It's interesting how, you know, you mentioned you're sort of more of like conservative mindset, like when it's finally done, put it out there. But Dan's more of like, let's just get it out there when we're, you know, when it's ready.
Yeah.
And I think that's something that creatives struggle with a lot on
Yeah.
Behance specifically. You know, you're never gonna, I don't think you'll ever feel 100% ready
Yeah.
to do it. So sometimes
Yeah.
you just gotta take the plunge, and, you know, it's the same with sort of like in any field, right? Like, you know, you may not be totally ready to take on a certain job responsibility, but you don't know until you
Yeah.
try. So you gotta kind of put yourself out there. So, but it is a fine line between
Yeah.
like showing the process and showing the finished piece, and like where do you kind
Yeah.
of jump right in?
Yeah.
And we always kind of say that a project is either going to end when we feel like we're done with it, or the due date hits. And more often than not, the due date comes, and we're just like, all right, we got to put something out the door, and
Yeah.
we'll put our best foot forward. But I think it's good to always be analyzing your work and looking back and seeing, you know, what you might have done differently through your later mindset.
Yeah.
Sure,
It
sure.
reminds me of I think like Lorne Michaels talks about this with SNL, where he's just like, the show is ready at 11:35 on Saturday night. Like that's like that's when it's ready. Like
Yep.
that's when it's like ready to go out. But that's like kind of I guess the unique thing of the digital space is that like you can put it out there, and like, you know, yeah, there's Google that will like scrub your page, and there's it's once it's on the internet, it's probably somewhere. But it's like, you know, on your website you can just be like, no,
You
like,
can edit
Yeah,
as you go.
edit, or
Totally.
like, you know, you change it. It's like that's kind of like the world we're living in. You can like manipulate this stuff over time if you need to, which is unique.
Yeah, and we're always kind of trying to curate our own website and improve things. And that's actually why one of the scariest things for me is when people have gotten tattoos of our artwork, which is very flattering. But sometimes I see it and think, oh wow, I might have made some changes
Yeah.
and still been working on that,
That's
and that's very
hilarious.
permanent
You have
now.
an old
so-
version.
That
of it,
is what I
sorry.
call final.
Yeah.
That's
Like, all right,
on you
that's done.
forever.
That's awesome.
That's incredible. So let's jump into the first portfolio we see here. So this is Caddy Huertas. So let's talk a little bit about this one.
Yeah, so this was really interesting because she is an illustrator, painter, ceramist, and knitter. So she kind of works in a lot
Wow.
of different mediums. And one thing that, actually Dan got a chance to look at these as well, so
Oh,
we had
cool.
kind of a conversation
Oh, that's
about
great.
some of them. But one thing we kind of noticed on this one initially is just the consistency of the color palette and the way that she illustrates figures. And it's a really great kind of unique look, especially how she does faces. But one thing that we noticed is this kind of consistent magenta pink palette that she works in. And you know, one thing we kind of struggle with some of our own artwork is, you know, how much should we define our own style as opposed to kind of adapting, you know, for each project and client. So I think, you know, it can kind of be a pro and a con in the sense that
Sure.
people may immediately recognize, you know, one of her paintings and say, oh yeah, that's a Caddy Huertas piece. But on the flip side, if she is kind of looking for more commercial work, is it possible that a client would come to her and say, you know, we like what you're doing, but could you work in our palette? So if I was going to kind
see.
of recommend one thing palette-wise, I would say, you know, if you can explore other colors and you know, other kind of themes in that realm, it might help to make it a little bit more broad as far as appealing to different audiences. But on the flip side, I also don't want to force people to, you know, do something that's not them and doesn't
Yeah.
feel right for their creative vision. So I
Yeah.
think it's a fine line.
Sure. One thing that I like that I noticed in the left-hand side, if you scroll a little bit down, sorry, in the profile, I think it's nice when people have in their little like bio, sort of like feel free to say hi or ask questions. It goes along with the theme of her work, which feels friendly and
Yeah.
inviting. And I don't know, I always find that
Yeah.
the easier it is to approach an artist, the more
Yeah.
opportunity.
Yeah, not like
opportunity
yeah,
they're
like
gonna
not like overly serious. about
Yeah,
it, like,
right.
Yeah, and I think it also helps to understand what they are after with their career, and you know, that's also helpful. Just trying to determine where their passions lie and what they might want to be doing with this portfolio. One thing that we do a lot of kind of process
nice.
documentation with our work, and I thought that was cool here that she was kind of showing how these things get layered together, and,
Right.
and just share another way of kind of making this a little bit more personal and showing you how she actually builds these.
Yeah, that was actually a question I had for you, which was, you know, the importance of showing your process, especially with illustration, you know, and is that something that you guys tend to show
Yeah,
with the final piece?
we really like doing that,
Yeah.
and it's interesting how I think people that might be potential clients as well as people that might take our classes or learn from us, there's value on both ends of that spectrum. And we've had situations, we kind of just started doing it for fun, and then started using it as a teaching tool. But then we've also found that clients will come to us and say, you know, when we release this ad campaign, will you also do a process video, and we'll release that alongside just as
Oh,
kind of
That's
a
cool.
behind the scenes thing.
Right,
So
right.
we didn't foresee that being part of it. But yeah, I think anytime you're willing to show process, even if it's just a small part of it, you don't want to
Yeah.
give away all your tricks, that can be super beneficial and
Yeah.
just kind of making the project a little more accessible to people.
Yeah, I think that's important is it kind of brings people into the tent a little bit more of just like, it's not just these images that live alone, like there's a process to it. So it's like, you know, if you're just starting out, it kind of shows that you've got the chops that you can do this, that it's not just like something you threw together or like took pieces from and just like reordered. It's like, no, you, especially in illustrations, like, no,
Yeah.
you can do it. Like
Yeah.
you can go through it, all that.
Yeah. One other thing I liked about her portfolio is the use of animation in some of these pieces, and I think typically we see a lot of motion graphics now that use a very clean, flat kind of vector style, and to see something very painterly
yeah.
that's
Yeah.
animated was also a nice kind of unique thing in her portfolio. So I would encourage her to continue to pursue that.
Right.
That was really cool.
This project was interesting because, you know, she's starting to play with typography and illustrating different things. And I thought this was really creative because a lot of times we'll see really hardcore illustrators that kind of view type as an afterthought.
Yeah.
And you might see a really beautiful, you know, poster, let's say, and then the band name or something is just tagged on at the end. You're like, wow, you really could have done something very custom there. It
Times
sometimes,
New Roman on the bottom.
yeah, it can be a missed opportunity.
Sure.
So this was really cool to see, and for this example, she was using Helvetica kind of as a starting point, and then illustrating each word. But I could see her pushing this even further too, and kind of, you know, really just doing hand lettered type, and
Right.
and that would be kind of a unique way to take that in a different direction. So as I mentioned, she's into knitting as well, which is cool. So it is kind of interesting that this heavily kind of painterly and illustrative portfolio starts to pepper in these knitted projects.
Right.
So you know, I would kind of be curious what her end goal is with this portfolio, and if it's specifically to get more of that kind of
Oh, yeah,
editorial painted or illustration jobs, then maybe she can curate this even further and
Sure.
not include some of these things, or it becomes a different site. Like, for example, this is her the branding that she did for her online store, which is beautiful, but it does kind of feel like an
Yeah.
outlier versus more of the painted projects.
Yeah, I think that's a fair point. And we were talking about that, you know, the top of the broadcast was, you know, doing all these different things. You know, you're seeing like Illustrator, but then even that project is like graphic design and like brand stuff like that. And, you know, it's finding
Your focus,
finding
yeah.
the focus.
Yeah. Yeah, I think you kind of have to
Sure.
decide if you want to use this site as a portfolio that's very specifically directed at the type of work you want to get, or if you're using it more as an archive to show all of your work.
Yeah.
And I guess you could go either way, but
Right.
in my opinion, I guess the way that we do it is we kind of divide up our website into different areas, and we have a featured work section. That's kind of the latest and greatest, you know, half a dozen projects that we want clients to see right away. And then if they really want to dig deep and see what the first gig poster was that we ever made, then they can kind of dig deeper into our blog.
Move into the archive, right.
But we don't really have that
Right.
front and center.
Something interesting, actually, all the way at the top that I should note is we don't have to go too much into it, but she does have a link to a website. And if you can see on the top right, it says View Adobe Portfolio. So something I should just mention to the viewers out there is that not only do we have Behance as this
sort of amazing network to showcase your work, but we also have a portfolio sort of pro website builder where all your work can go from Behance into sort of a more customized, branded website. And so, you know, you're mentioning this, like, you have your featured projects and then kind of you can go deeper. I think that's something that Adobe Portfolio is great at providing, is just a sense that, like, Behance, you can have, you know, every project there. You know, as we can see, you have older stuff, maybe stuff that's not exactly focused, but then you could curate that in your own website. So it's kind of a nice balance.
Yeah. I think as a fellow creative, I really like being able to go back and see, you know, where did this person's journey start and how did their style evolve, but a potential client may not care about that, and they just want to see, you know, what's your best work and can you do that for me?
Yeah,
For sure.
I think that you have to keep like the goal in mind of like what this is like.
Where is this going,
am I
yeah.
using my Behance just to like make friends and make contacts, things like that, or is it for like that professional job? You know, what's, you know, should I have? I think you mentioned like having like separate websites for the things you want to do. Like, how does you know balance it? It's not, you know, one size fits all for creative work.
Right. We kind of struggle with that in our business because we have one kind of client-facing side, which is looking to get new design clients, and then we also have an online store that's more customer-facing and trying to sell art prints and things like that. So we're always trying to figure out how best to direct people to those different areas. I thought this page of the portfolio was nice in that she kind of showed these editorial illustrations in the context and mocked them up in the magazines. I think that, you know, having real photography of these, or maybe even, you know, working with this background color more to really finesse it, is a nice way of, you know, really showing things in context. So you get a nice variety of seeing how these projects exist in the real world.
For sure. So let's hop on over to the next portfolio we have. So this is Alexei Rico from Russia. Yeah, so walk us through sort of your thoughts on this one.
Yeah, I was excited to see this portfolio because the style immediately reminded me of kind of what I've seen in the gig poster world, and it felt like a bit of a familiar aesthetic. And he's clearly a super talented illustrator when it comes to this vector style, but kind of hearkening back to almost a woodcut modern version of something like that. And another example of someone that shows process
cool.
in their portfolio. So again, kudos for doing something like that. I always like seeing how these things get
layer
layered.
upon layer, yeah. That's really cool. Without giving away the secrets.
Yeah. And then it was also another process thing that we like to sometimes share, and we always start a project with some type of comp, whether it's just a photo mock-up collage like what he's doing here with this Kong poster, or a pencil sketch. We just like having a kind of a roadmap of where the project's going to go, and to open a blank Illustrator document is pretty much the scariest thing that I could imagine. So
It's like the blank Word document, the cursor's just like blinking.
yeah, so to have some kind of guidelines is helpful. So this was cool to see, you know, how he was starting to play with composition, and then
That's really cool.
just seeing how vibrant the colors are in a piece like this is really cool. And this is a great example of what I was talking about before. The type is clearly not an afterthought.
Right, it's built right in.
He definitely, you know, took some time to do something custom. One pet peeve I sometimes have with type is that with a word like skull with the double L, if you ever see two L's like this that are exactly the same and just realize that it's a brush font or something, that's a little bit of a bummer. I would want to see more customization, and he clearly did that here.
Yeah, to fit it in that, like the,
To
give it something else, not
Wow, that's so
next
interesting.
to really do
Yeah.
something custom. And then actually, I think once we get down here, you can see how we actually did this lettering, which is all actually brushed on paper by hand. So that was really impressive as well.
I'm like amazed. So question for you, actually, just broader. Do you sort of consider, when you think of like an illustrator, is it because they have the ability to illustrate with a pencil versus a vector? Does that matter? You know, how does that sort of difference play a role?
That's a great question because I would consider myself an illustrator, but just barely, I think,
Okay.
because I did not really grow up, with a paintbrush in my hand every day. My style of illustration is more, I'd say, kind of a geometric process of building things and layering within the computer. Like I was saying, Dan kind of grew up with more of that fine art, I guess, traditional illustration background. But actually, a lot of times people are surprised to learn that he does all his illustration now with a trackpad. So, there are many different avenues to become an illustrator. And, there are people like Jason Munn, who's he has a very minimalist style. And I still consider him an illustrator, even though not everything, you're not seeing his hand in the brush strokes, for example. But there's a lot of different avenues and ways, which I think is awesome, that there are it's such a broad way to define someone as an illustrator, whether they're great at that pen and ink style, or if they have some way of putting their compositions together.
Cool.
One other thing I wanted to note on this project is just how vibrant the colors are, which is cool, but I would also be curious to see a piece like this printed, because while we're kind of seeing this on-screen RGB super saturated spectrum, it might get a little bit more muted on a printed page. And I think I would actually prefer, a lot of times with our work we start subduing colors a little bit, adding texture, and even if it's only going to be used on screen, trying to make it feel a little bit more tangible, like it might actually exist somewhere in the real world.
Sure.
And with Alexi, his work is so complex and detailed that I actually think some of the most successful work is where we're just working in grayscale.
Oh, wow.
And for example, this poster I thought was really beautiful and striking, just doing it in black and white.
Wow.
Right, and I could totally see that as something that could be printed and would really...
Yeah, and the on-screen version and the printed version would probably look very similar. And I also like, something else we try to do is show close-ups of the work. And like you were talking about earlier with Hector, a lot of times we're looking at things on small devices and you can't see this level of detail.
Right.
So any opportunity to see what people are actually including at this scale is pretty amazing to be able to see in a portfolio.
Yeah, because if you're an illustrator, you can like zoom into like a pixel view, and like some people like work at that level, which is totally crazy.
Yeah.
And then like you zoom out and you just like the naked eye can't even pick that up.
Right.
So, like I love seeing like those close-up shots, because also if you're a viewer, you're spending a little more time being like, oh, that's that part. Like you're not just like
Honing in
scrolling through,
on,
like you're just looking at you're going in a little bit.
And to that end, sometimes we limit the the threshold to how far we can zoom in Illustrator, because it is easy to get bogged down creating those little details, and then we realize, when we screen print this, the screen can't hold the resolution, and we just wasted 2 days. So,
right.
So there was an example in here of where these did actually get transferred onto canvas, and these were painted. I think kind of with a stencil technique, and I thought these were kind of my favorite part of his portfolio, because it took that very clean, vibrant vector look and kind of knocked off a little bit of that shininess, and you get to see the texture of the canvas and imperfections in the paint, and it just, to me, feels like a more sophisticated kind of end product. So I would definitely encourage him to keep kind of working on canvas like this. And he's clearly great at it, and actually has quite a few of these canvas projects.
And he actually lists the
spray paint
and canvas. Wow.
And then as we get down here, he did portraits for family members and
it's really cool.
all kinds of things. And again, we get to see the layering process. So yeah, this was probably my favorite project as far as adding another dimension and more texture to the work. And then as we get down to these kind of earlier projects, again, same type of idea of curating your portfolio. He did mention in his bio that he likes working with lettering and logo types, but some of these projects don't kind of fit in to the rest of the work in quite the same way. So I think there's definitely amazing examples of lettering in some of those projects we already looked at that he could definitely keep in there and maybe highlight as a separate lettering project. But I think some of these things, if he doesn't really want to be a web designer, for example, maybe something like this Clever Pumpkin website no longer needs to be in the portfolio.
Right.
So again, it just kind of comes down to what you're after, what kind of work you want to pursue, and just because you did a project doesn't mean it needs to be in there. So I always kind of encourage people to be pretty strict with yourself and what you want to share.
It's like when you are buying, like when I go shopping and I'm like, I got to get rid of something before I can bring something back home.
One in, one out.
Or else this is going to be too much.
Yeah.
So, yeah, it's a kind of a good
It's
rule
funny,
of thumb.
Yeah, because even just like scrolling up to like the stuff that he had before, it's like if you sent me a screenshot of that versus what I'm seeing here, I'm like, that's
you wouldn't know the same
That's
person.
two different people that are doing this work.
Yeah.
I like the use of text too. I think he always adds a little sort of description about what you're about to see, which I find really helpful.
And that's great also to know, like that Kong poster was actually, he wrote that was part of an official gallery show from Legendary Pictures that produced the film, and it was in this gallery in New York, and you would have never known had he not written that if that was just a personal project, or it gives you some context.
Wow, that's huge, because I looked at it and like I didn't get a chance to read it, but I was just like, in my mind I was like, I wonder if this was like a real thing that he did, or like it wasn't. And I think, if you're looking at a portfolio and you don't know this person, you don't know anything about them, having no context, I might have just been like, well, it's not the real poster, so I don't think it's like a thing, like he just did this on his own. But having that extra bit of context, you're like, oh, actually, like this was a thing. That's really cool.
Yeah, I think it's important. I recently had someone comment on a Wizard of Oz poster that we had done and said, you're going to get in trouble with the studio for making that. And I said, it actually was commissioned by the studio, and here's the copyright information. And a lot of times people assume that it is just unofficial fan art or something. So you kind of need to. That's
really funny.
To reinforce
you got to a place where it was actually that. No,
It's really funny.
So let's hop over to the last illustration portfolio that we have here. Celsius, what a name, from Madrid. So this one definitely has an interesting style.
Yeah.
So
all three of these were so unique, which was great to see. And one interesting thing with this portfolio is when we both first looked at it, we kind of thought, is he a collage artist that is using these, old etchings and putting them together?
Oh, wow.
Just because they did look so authentic. And then as we started initially digging in, realized, oh, he's actually doing this himself with an insane level of detail. Which was really cool to see that process, because this is far beyond anything that I could do by hand. So it's interesting because it has a very that traditional etched black and white look, but in some of the other projects that we'll see, he's finding ways to modernize it and really make it his own.
That's a theme we were seeing throughout. Every single one that you had was the GIF of the layers. That's great.
And that works so well for, I feel like, illustration in particular, but I think you can bring that to the other creative fields, which it was interesting. We didn't really see that as much in other creative fields as you'd think. And that was kind of when we were talking to Hector, just like the process of it, like that's like it was his part. Yeah. And like it's pretty simple. Like you can do that, and you're like, oh, that was really neat. Like that was the before, after, like the middle.
Yeah, and there's a lot of great tools for that now to capture your screen and record your process. I've seen people go to lengths of, strapping a GoPro to their head while they're drawing, which I would find a little distracting, but
wow,
it's definitely, way easier now to capture your process. One interesting theme in his work is combining organic things with more mechanical things, and this is actually a print that he sells in his store. So again, it's kind of a unique aesthetic, almost reminded me of old Monty Python cartoons or things. And I think with this, I think these are giclée prints, so they're digital as far as I know, but one thought that Dan had actually was looking at printing techniques for things, and if you know, things like letterpress or using gold foil and having a printing process that feels as ornate as the style of illustration itself could be a cool way to push this even further.
Wow.
And this book cover was an interesting project because unlike the rest of his work where we're kind of using that traditional black key line, this kind of switching over to the navy blue and changing up the palette felt a bit more modern and a bit more unique. So I think this would be an interesting direction to continue to pursue as far as, you know, it definitely still feels like that traditional etching technique, but taking it in a different direction with color and doing something a bit more unexpected with it. Let's see. Oh, this was an interesting project because unlike the others that kind of have this historical feel.
For something completely different now.
Yeah. This was kind of looking at that collage technique, but using modern photos of motorcycles.
Wow.
Yeah, so I think this project has a lot of potential to maybe be showcased a little bit differently. And I think he mentioned in the text here that this was a proposal that didn't end up actually being produced. And I'm wondering, you know, if something like this could just be cleaned up as far as showing a grid of all the cards or just finding a very clean way to display them. Maybe the logos at the top aren't necessary unless, you know, he might be required to show those. But yeah, I think, you know, like some of the other people had spoken about, you know, it's just as much about the work itself as how you decide to showcase it. So I think something like this is definitely a lot of opportunities to, you know, do a very clean layout. Obviously, if it doesn't exist in real life, you can't have a photo shoot. But I think there are ways to kind of present details as well as showing the full scope of the project. I know that creating a whole deck of playing cards is a huge undertaking. It'd be cool to emphasize, you know, the consistency and everything that goes into a big series like that.
So if you note at the top of his portfolio, I noticed that Socia has like web references, both like on the web and then on the left side, and then below the about area, there's like additional web references. How important do you feel that is for someone's portfolio to sort of list additional resources to get to know that person? And
I think it can be helpful if those kind of sites on the web are taking you to something that's bringing additional information to them. I think if there's a lot of redundancy, then maybe you know, that could be a hindrance if you're just trying to get people to focus on what you do. Yeah, so for us, we try to limit it to a certain extent. Like we have a handful of social networks that we're on, but we try not to hit people over the head with too many different choices and just kind of focus on some over others. But yeah, I think like we talked about before, it's just another way to give people a little bit more information about yourself, make this a little bit more personable. And in this case, he, in addition to being an artist, he also has his own online store, so that's always helpful to, you know, drive traffic there. And he has a blog where maybe he talks more about the process. So, and then Instagram just being a quick reference to his work rather than looking at an entire site. So I think in this case, since they're all serving different purposes, it can be very beneficial.
Yeah, I guess like if it complements the work or isn't redundant, it's kind of cool to see.
Yeah, and like works to the strength of, I guess, that network. You know, that like you're not just posting the same thing on every single one, like trying to hit every person that like you know on those networks, because there's overlap. Like there are people who like follow you on Instagram and Twitter and like okay, like I've seen this like 15 times, like I get it.
And I think also for your own sanity, if you're constantly having to update and, you know, babysit all those different sites, it's like, wow, I haven't drawn anything for a month. I'm just updating my social networks.
Yeah, that's something I've heard from like students, especially. They're just like, I feel like on like the opposite end of the spectrum when we're talking to Margo, where she's like, you know, updating stuff, you kind of have to like fill it in. Like there's some people like, I spend all my time just like updating this and like Instagram and everything. It's like finding the balance of you know working it in, like, you know, when you're working on something, you know, then update your places and like get back to work.
Yeah. And I think that also you can prioritize that based again on the type of work that you're looking for. So like in our case, if we want to do more packaging design, we might prioritize putting those, you know, beer bottles on our website and let that do some work for us while we're on other projects. But if we're less interested in doing web design and we just did a website for someone, we
Sure.
probably won't jump to add that to
Yeah.
the
Sure.
portfolio.
Bury that a little bit.
Amazing. Any other final thoughts on this one?
I think my only other thought here was that there were a few pieces that were more kind of sculptural and exhibitions. This project was actually part of a group show. And I'd be curious what you guys think about including something like this on in someone's portfolio, because it can sometimes, I think, it's cool to see that he was part of this.
Yeah.
At the same time, you need to dig a little bit to find which piece was his contribution to it.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah. I would say that I would probably recommend them listing that maybe as a web reference, actually, or sort of like a publication in a sense, or, where I've been seen, where I've been
Yeah.
featured, rather than project itself. Because it is very valuable to
Yeah.
see
Yeah.
that he was in that collection.
And he does have his specific piece as a separate project
Yeah.
in here.
Okay, yeah.
So yeah, I think like you're saying, that could be
Maybe
almost part of
consolidate.
his resume, saying,
Yeah.
these are the exhibitions I was part
Yeah,
of.
or at least referencing it in like that one that is just his. I think sometimes we run into members who they are thinking about this stuff on Behance before the work even gets started. They're just like, we want to like have this project that's gonna have like 15 people on it, and
Yep.
like we're gonna do this whole thing, and it's like admirable, but sometimes it can get confusing. Like if you're just viewing through it, or maybe like it can be the case sometimes where if you've had that project on there for 5-6 years and you're just like, I don't want to be part of this anymore. It's like a whole like thing after that. Like
Right.
you're like leaving this project, and like how do you like negotiate that with like your
Yeah.
stuff's on there?
You're embedded at that point.
Yeah, exactly. So I think it can be a little difficult. Like when we kind of see it, it's like it's when it's become a little bit difficult to like get out of it.
Cool. Well, thank you so much, Nathan, for joining us. This
My
was
pleasure.
awesome to kind of talk all these through, and I'm sure these members really, really appreciate the feedback that you can give, especially with your experience. And with that, we're going to wrap up this broadcast. So if you have any additional questions, please go ahead and chat them now. We'll try and see if we can take anything from the chat if you guys have any questions specifically for Nathan or for us. But otherwise, we really want to thank all of our reviewers today for taking the time, and for the community for participating in the chat, for submitting the portfolios that we reviewed today. If you didn't hear before, we're actually doing this as a week-long initiative called Portfolio Review Week. And so in-person events are happening across the globe through this week, through Saturday. So if you feel like this sort of has inspired you to get your portfolio reviewed, please go to behance.net/reviews and attend an event near you. It's super valuable. As you can see, getting feedback is just something that is necessary to sort of succeed. So yeah, we want to thank everyone.
Thanks again, everyone.
And yes, it's going to be posted online later. There will be a replay for everyone in the chat that was wondering. Anything else?
No, I think that's it. Thank you very much. Thanks, everyone.
Thanks, everyone.